we starting Zoom too?
Zoom's already started.
Okay, can you check that Sharon is waiting?
Sharon, as in Sharon right there?
No, Sharon has some Zoom.
There should be no waiting room right now, so it should be.
Y'all make some. Put your hands together.
Half your life you struggle, half your life you fight. Your life making
now. You know, one of the things we always want to talk about when we're talking about the vote and why it's important, Dal is actually going to talk to you about a tax issue that the Coalition of Large Tribes have been working on. We recruited Dal to help us with this tax deal. And he submitted paperwork to U.S. Treasury. And it took him 2 days to condense it down to only 105 pages. So, but what happened though was they listened to us. And I think the information that he is going to give you is going to be pretty exciting, not just because of what they're going to do, but what tribes can do after it's in effect. So with that, I want to introduce Dal Lavador. He's a former acting Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs under the Obama administration. He has done so much for COLT, him along with Jennifer Waddell, that we have been able to accomplish a lot of things that would not have happened without them. So with that, I want to bring Dal up here and talk to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, you have to plug. Okay, as she's coming up, I'll just introduce myself and then I'm going to walk through a few slides. I didn't want this to be like a long PowerPoint presentation, but to be as condensed as possible. And then what I'd like to do is link it to all of the previous discussions and the subject matter of voting and show you how relevant it is. But before I begin, always introduce ourselves in our language. Shodaji, aho akbaradia, hina alayashja ewishjik, biab saloke, bisahia, koraja, ek bapobasa, bagondilish, ek balakbaga, hina bagon batchajish, ek bishbalagusa batchajish. Just wanted to say thank you for the hosts, their homeland here, for inviting me and this wonderful forum. I want to appreciate all the speakers that came before me. And then also, I just thank my ancestors for some of the messages, resilience and survival, that I'm even here today to even make this presentation. So this area, if you were to leave with just 3 words, like Stacey Abrams' powerful speech, you know, she had the 3 V's. In this case, the 3 words would be Indians not taxed. It's in the US Constitution, has largely been ignored, and I would say that we are now actively working on resurrecting the original meaning. Because tribes are separate political governments that pre-existed all the others. What was found over time, and I spent 2 years in a library digging down every case I could find on the origin of that phrase, any articles or literature about it, and then all the subsequent cases, which are roughly 150 years of case law. And I'm here to tell you, it is upside down, to say the least. And through these slides, I'll show you why I believe that to be true after significant historical research. And then as I do a quick walkthrough of history to point out the connections on where we're at today with the US Treasury, because some important developments have started to occur. And so from that perspective, if you look over at the screen, I'm just going to go through these 6 slides and then we have a few others that I'll bring it to current times. But taxation hasn't always been the way it's been today. Now you have multiple governments all on top of each other providing various services, and there's various justifications and names of them, right? You hear the federal income tax, the federal excise tax, the state income tax, You hear of ad valorem tax for property taxes. Consistently, what you find though is that post-World War II is really when all of the local governments started to get authorization by state governments to create special assessment taxes. And so they began to grow and grow and grow. And but before I show you this next chart that I think will be demonstrative of that, if you look over here, this is what I've found in that summary and research is that the wealth of many Americans depends on a relationship to one government or more. And all of these different types of wealth, they have different names, like I said, and then each of those governments reaches in and grabs a piece of the pie, except for one set of governments, tribal nations. They've been left out of the entire tax equation. And if you can go to the next slide. Look at the collections over 200 years since the origin of this country. You see the federal started fairly minimal at the time, but these aren't adjusted for today's dollars. You can imagine that was a lot of money then. And you look over 100 years, how much the federal grew, and then you go to 1950, we're changing from M to B in billions in tax collections, and then now, today, trillions of dollars. You see the states. It wasn't documented data at that time, but you can see they have slowly grown to very significant tax collections when you're talking $500 billion or more. And then local, county, townships, et cetera, cities, you can see they're all the way up to $270 billion. How many taxes are tribes collecting? There's a resort tax on this bill, but it's been mired in litigation over the last 70 years, and I would even argue for 150 years. Next slide. So the US Constitution, we have to go back to the beginning because this is really important. If we don't educate and inform the policymakers, they're not going to understand all of this. They're just going to understand what they exist in today. It's just like we're born into a set of ancestral circumstances, right? And that's who we are. We identify with the land, the language, the culture, our relations. Other people are born into this larger society, and they just know that they have to pay taxes on everything they earn. Except if you're super wealthy and a tech giant, where there's very minimal taxes paid, because they hire a bunch of tax lawyers to move them around in shells and shield their income from tax. They call it wealth enhancement and tax minimization, right? Fancy terms to say they don't really want to pay a lot. These early cases, like for example, these are the main ones that were interpreting this phrase, and it has on there Cherokee Tobacco. The reason that is such a significant case, the court, there actually weren't any internal revenue laws. Do you remember the last slide where I showed you where the feds started growing mostly in the last century? But there really wasn't any internal revenue district or laws over Cherokee, and they were growing tobacco, and they were assessed federal taxes, excise taxes, inside the reservation. And they had express treaty language that actually said, you cannot tax any of our revenue. The Supreme Court just ignored it. There wasn't even a district there. Every other single case that talks about Indians paying taxes refers to Cherokee Tobacco. And it's just wrong on its face. Through history, through what I just showed you, and that is the origin story for federal taxes in Indian country. It's just assumed it's paid, right? Or the IRS is going to enforce it. And they're going to put a lien on something. Garnish wages, garnish whatever revenue is created. The interesting part is the Indians not taxed is in Article 1, Section 2 of the US Constitution. And it involves representation. It says, those people who are going to represent us, if you were to pull the constitutional, I'm paraphrasing, and it says, excluding Indians not taxed and 3/5 of all other people. We know what the 3/5 was, right? That was the slaves for representation, and Indians not taxed was in there. You have the post-Civil War, and you have the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution, right? Abolishing slavery, creating privileges and immunities in the 14th Amendment. And the instruction at the time that the country decided was, we have to change this dynamic, and the 3/5 was removed. The 14th Amendment to the Constitution kept the phrase, Indians not taxed. Why would they keep that phrase when they had the chance to change it, when they deleted 3/5 of all person? Because that was our original understanding, right? Was that you're not going to reach in and take this revenue. We're separate entities. We address that through some contractual arrangement like a treaty, just like they do with other countries. And the US does it with territories. Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, there's tax treaties with them on deciding what wealth they're going to share if their citizens go over there and spend the money to create the wealth in the first place, right? So they have a contractual arrangement. That just simply hasn't happened in Indian country. And shortly before the 100-year right to vote in a federal statute, the 16th Amendment to the Constitution, and that's what authorized direct federal income taxes. So that was done in 1913. There's a bunch of cases and US Attorney General interpretations. At one point they said, okay, Indians not taxed, they're not supposed to be taxed. And then the second this amendment allowing a direct tax happened, the Supreme Court turned around and did some logical somersaults to get there. But they said, of course it applies to Indian country, and they have to point to an exclusion or exemption from this direct tax. The reason this is so important is that the voting, you elect the people, they discuss tax policy. If you've never been allowed to collect a tax in the first place, and the people that are representing you don't have this history, what are you left with? We're left with a series of cases that I don't need to go over that are all usually against tribal interests and individual Indians paying taxes. They almost always end up losing. And I don't need to go into a lot of it, but the one piece I will say was there was a pause in 1934 with the Indian Reorganization Act where they allowed tribes to formulate their governments, and that was mostly for federal grants and federal control to a large degree. But in that situation, that's what created tribes being non-taxable because they went under that federal statute. And then also there's, I don't want to get into the mechanics or the different sections of that, but there are section 16 and section 17 of that act, and that's actually what most of the casinos are section 17 corporations. So they're non-taxable per this understanding. It's the one big exclusion that remains. Next slide. And you can go down all of these cases, and I guess if I were to summarize all of that, the IRS is the agency to enforce the Internal Revenue Code. Now, most of us, and maybe not everyone knows, but we know that Title 25 of the US Code is Indians. And there's the old days, not electronic, but like 6 sets of CFRs, Code of Federal Regulations that we live by. The tax code is Title 26, the next title. Notice it came after the Indians and all the control through the Intercourse Acts and all the different things, because the code had to be developed. In limited instances, the IRS has taken the position that if it's a federally chartered corporation, it's not taxable. That was the only forward-facing public resolution. And then there's a whole bunch of what they call private letter rulings, which are only unique to the parties. And then there's technical advice memorandums, there's revenue procedures, they call them RevProcs. There's all this shorthand terminology with tax lawyers that, and the long and short of it is, almost all of it has been to the detriment, the violation of the treaties and tribal sovereignty by just applying the tax without going back to the original Indians not taxed. So are you starting to see the link of that original phrase, the policymakers, and then we have an agency that enforces, and no one has the full history? So we're going to end up with this kind of patchwork of decisions that are largely negative. Occasional exceptions in all of this here. Next slide. And then there's a whole bunch of cases. The NARF people will know this, and the law professors and others in the crowd who live in this area. You know, there's a bunch of cases that they looked like limited victories for a while, but then eventually were whittled down. And now what we have in all the US Supreme Court litigation is a balancing of interests. So you have federal interests. This is all in Indian country and all of Indian country's wealth, right? It's a balancing. So you do tribes' interest, feds' interest, states' interest, counties' interest, cities' interest. And what do you think usually happens? Most of the time, the wealth is divided up among all the governments, right? Even with gaming, right? There's a revenue sharing agreement that's part of the federal statute. Next slide. So here's the conclusion, and I'll read this for everyone to maybe integrate and try to understand this perspective, is that since the founding of the Republic, every generation of Americans and their elected officials, local and national, has debated who controls some form of wealth in Indian country. And I list out some of them, right? Property, natural resources, minerals, gaming, gasoline, cigarettes, name it, right? And there's some kind of other government reaching in and debating who should have it. And most of the time, the Indians weren't in office, so they're not the officials to be debating. No one's asserting the tribal interest in that set of discussions. And so my conclusions are that, you know, federal Indian policy has really created this kind of changing of the status of tribal governments and their economic activities to, by and large, be a set of rules that really don't work for Indian country and almost invariably end up in other governments' pockets in their tax collection. And the part that's so important about that is those monies that should be returned to do services, roads, electricity, homes, they don't come back. Once they're out in the other governments, they keep them. They never go back inside. So we have this wealth gap. You know, there's no accumulation of wealth. If the feds hold title to the land and all the economic activities are sliced up among all the governments, how much is left? Not very much, right? So that's a structural problem that we have for tax collections. And then down here, it ends up in litigation, and there's some wins, and NARF and NCI have done a good job in doing a Supreme Court project to try to keep some of these cases out, because if bad facts make bad law, we know that if the facts aren't there and people haven't done the right protest procedures, they haven't followed through on all the process, they're gonna end up losing. So that's at least stopping it from getting worse, right? Next slide.
That's the last slide.
Okay. So that is some of the origin story of, you know, I started 25 years ago into this area, and I did the research, and then I joined the National Tribal Tax Alliance. And we had little tiny conferences at the time. There really wasn't a lot of people involved. It's grown a lot since then. And so there's now a few things that have changed. There's one called the General Welfare Exclusion Act, which was in 2014. And that statute said certain benefits that tribal governments pay to their citizens should not be taxable. So there's an actual federal law, because there was enough people saying, this picture is not right, because if we do, say, powwows and you give money to a drum or to the dancers, should that be taxable? No, that shouldn't be. It's inside. It's inside. That's tribal sovereignty. They should get to decide what they do with their money. And then now more recently, and this is where elections matter, so that was during the second term of the Obama administration. So we had support We had people who cared. Out of that came this Tribal Technical Advisory Group. They refer to it as the TTAC. And so tribal leaders have had a seat at the table with the U.S. Department of Treasury, which they never had before. Fast forward to the Biden administration, we have our first native treasurer of the United States, Lynn Malerba. She recruits people, brings a team in, and then works with the TTAC, and now they're switching the agency interpretations back to the original Indians not taxed. So voting matters, elections matter, the people who are appointed matter, and now when we can get them in agencies that we historically have not had, we start to see positive results. So you remember in the speech from Stacey Abrams yesterday, we're building the foundation, and we're going to turn and transition it to the next generation to keep building on this to get back to original principles, which is Indians not taxed, and tribal governments shouldn't be taxed, we know that, and tribal entities should not be taxed, and tribal benefits should not be taxed. That's consistent with Indians not taxed. So she's got some nice pictures here where we're at Treasury. In all my years in the Obama administration, we hardly ever met at Treasury. I've had more meetings in 2 years at Treasury than I did in 4 years of service. I mean, that should tell you how much has changed in 12 years. It's pretty remarkable. And the voting and the appointees, it all matters. I just want to point out a couple of things that are going to require immediate attention from folks who have the capacity and interest to do it. Treasury just came out with this new notice of proposed rulemaking where, I don't know if you can pull up the fact sheet, really important things that are happening that I think are very favorable for Indian country, protects that wealth inside, and then the Indians get to decide what they do with their own wealth generation. So it's building blocks, right? But we're gonna need probably some serious litigation to unfold some of the really terrible precedent and among other things, and policy-making agenda.
Meet our friends in the back.
Is that?
It's up.
Okay, she's trying to pull up a different slide here.
Yeah, it's up on my screen.
Yeah, it's on her screen. In any event, so you remember the balancing of interests that the current U.S. Supreme Court federal Indian law is at today. When there's a notice of proposed rulemaking that's put out, all the public gets to comment on that rule, like everybody. The other governments are watching, and they're starting to put in their objections because their settled expectations are to share in the Indian revenue, right? We know that that is wrong as a matter of law, policy, and morality, and that the wealth should stay within Indian country and be utilized by Indians, not by other governments who aren't actually providing the services to the Indians. So the notice just went out in the last week, and they need to hear from Indian country. We need to say, yes, we support this new rule, and here are all the reasons why we support it. But it has a number of features that I think anyone who reads it on there will be able to see that, if you could move down. So, so deference to tribes, which is what we want. So they're going to defer to the tribes to just say, we think this is a general welfare piece, this benefit, and it's not taxable by anyone else, especially the federal government. There's broad definition, so they include a bigger circle of family members, so it's not just the enrolled citizen of the nation, it's all their family as well, and even descendants. That's a huge, huge step forward. And then the need requirement, there was, if many of you know, there's always this means testing for benefits. This is getting rid of that. You don't have to demonstrate the need. It's just given out because they're a survival of the citizens of the First Nations, period. You don't have to demonstrate the need. And then uniform payments, so that means you don't have to pick groups of of your community members who are, like say there's elder payment, or there might be a youth payment, or there might be, they're saying you can just send it out regardless. You don't have to create these arbitrary structures so that they won't be taxed. And then finally, the audits by the IRS are they're still suspended pending the outcome of this rule. And then I'll end here with one final thing. On the remarks that OJ had mentioned of spending a lot of time on, and I basically took my 2 years of research, that was an LLM thesis, and turned it into comments. And what I demonstrated to Treasury and the IRS, and they had their own debate inside, was that at a minimum, any tribally owned entity, I don't care if you call it a C Corp, an S Corp, an LLC, and PLLP, whatever it is, those are the same as the tribe, and any revenue they get should not be taxed, because that's consistent with Indians not taxed. I can't speak for the administration. It's our expectation that there's going to be a notice of a proposed rule that affirms that. So every enterprise and casino, as long as it's wholly owned, will not be subject to any of the federal taxes. I cannot tell you how critical this is going to be. It's going to open the door to capital for the first time. Capital has not been deployed in Indian country. It's always a challenge. You know, we need it for housing, we need it for roads, we need it for all the above, especially water, sewer. There's always problems out in Indian country, just endless challenges, especially with cult tribes. We can leverage the economic activity to get access to those other loans that other governments use to build baseball stadiums and to build football stadiums, right? That's what they do with it. We provide services to the people. We're different. We're going to take care of our relatives. We're not going to build a baseball stadium. We're going to get infrastructure in there. You heard from so many other speakers on why the native vote matters. Well, this also matters. This is why voting matters, because we wouldn't have got the people in that we did who have listened to us, and they said, yeah, you're right. Indians not taxed should be restored to its original position. So just note for you and the communities, it's time to start commenting. It's at the end of this administration, Biden's administration, and we need to get this finalized so that it actually is the law of the land. And then all the benefits can start flowing from that. So I think I will just end there and just say one final thing. It's time that tribes be in control of their own revenue. They should get to decide how they're going to use it. And we need wealth generation and to keep our wealth. And so we can pass that on like other people do in America. We need that ability as well. And then that can give people more opportunities, more and more opportunities. And I think if we can get to that point and we have this foundation, we also can keep building on that. And that Indian country will benefit immeasurably by all the things that are in motion right now. So appreciate it. Thank you for listening.
The Indian in the cupboard.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think the responses on this first rule will be, they're going to do consultation and they expect responses. And please have folks in your communities be positively commenting on these and even point out how important they are to rebuild the foundation for wealth protection and generation in Indian country.
One more question, Dale. When you say it's going to provide a bigger economic opportunity for tribes, what do you mean?
He's saying, how does this equate to more economic opportunities for tribes? And they can create any entity of their choosing in whatever form it is, and whatever they make out of that, they keep. So the more that stays in, the more they can do with. They can create other second, third, fourth generation opportunities. Like the casino here, You start at the casino, you build the hotel, then you build the resort around it, you fix the roads all over, you get new parking, you upgrade. That hasn't been available. Only in these, they have to take huge financial risks to make this happen. And it's market driven. This will allow people who are not in the markets to have more of the wealth and create their opportunities. So that's why it's important.
Do you want to talk about cultural and ceremonial activities? Yeah.
What's that? Oh.
So this is in relationship to the tribes. How does it benefit the urban group? What do they have to do or engage in?
Well, all the urban Indians that are citizens oftentimes still have a connection to home, and they often will go back. Sometimes they can't go back because there's no economic opportunity. So if the more opportunities that are created at home, the more opportunities they have to go home. And it's a challenge, but if we start opening the access to capital and access to economic opportunity, then people can go back and forth, and they could form partnerships that are tribally owned, and they could work in those economic opportunities and have, say, satellite offices in other areas where people live. So I think it just opens up a whole lot of opportunities.
May I say that the education has to in fact be focused and go through Native organizations because so many of them are in school or they have jobs, they have the business experience from the jobs and from everywhere to be able to form partnerships on the tribal basis.
Yeah, she had mentioned just a lot of the economic opportunities in schooling are off, or maybe in urban areas, and that is a common thing that happens. People leave to go do that, then they try to come home, but they may have already started a family and already have things that they want to stay where they're at. And then, but it would be nice to have a choice. That's the thing that has not happened in Indian country. It's always been take it or leave it. It's never been, oh, there's a multitude of choices for you as a community, and you decide. You put the money to bring the people home, you know, whatever it takes. But it's nice to start to have that discussion, to say, this is our choice. Or each family or individual says, I now have a choice, and I prefer to stay or I prefer to go back.
Just to, so I can get my thinking straight, what if like an urban organization works with the tribe, creates a section 17, would they fall under that umbrella?
Yeah, just to repeat for everyone, OJ's asking, what if they're in an urban area and then maybe they partner up with a tribally owned entity, and would they be non-taxable? And I think depending on if these rules get finalized, you were pointing at the earlier one I said, the federal charter, but maybe the problem, without going into too many fine details and boring everybody, the choice of entity is something that people with wealth do all the time. Sometimes it's more advantageous to be in a partnership because there's what they call a flow-through. Sometimes people want a C Corp because they want the governing structure with a board of directors. Sometimes they elect to be an S corporation. You know, there's just built-in options all over in the code for people doing business. And they decide what entity they're going to use. Those are the opportunities I'd like to see for Indian country and partnering up between urban and reservation. And if we can get that finalized and done, then these opportunities will finally happen for people who are creative and have the background and want to see the economic opportunity. Because our youth are very creative. And I think if we give them the tools, the vehicle to get there, you know, and not have to choose, they can choose between wherever they're at, they can stay where they're at, but they can be involved in the economic opportunities that are created. So with that, anything else? All right, again, thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, moving along, it's now 12:45. We're getting close. I want to give people a minute or two for them to round up the multicultural panel and have them come up here and get ready for the next discussion. I'll pull out my smoke signals here.
Tiwa Mankala. Tiwa Mankala.
Tiwa Mankala. Okay, thank you. Yeah, no worries.
I'm excited to hear from you. Oh, yeah. I've been waiting for this.
We need an extra chair. Brief introduction of who I am, who I'm, please. And then I've got really just two questions that I'm going to open it up to the panel, and you guys can kind of free will it how you want to answer it, and you can all answer it, or however you want to do that. Okay. Okay. I think we're just waiting for.
I think it's already. I think yours was on top.
I think we're waiting for just one more panelist.
Okay, yeah, because on the agenda I only had like 2 people. Yeah. So who are you waiting for?
Waiting for Donna, yeah. Donna? Yeah, we'll need one more. She's going to participate remotely. What's that? She's going to participate remotely. Okay, I think we're set. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Chante washte na pe chuzapelo. Chetan washte mielo. Mitinak Indian Nation of New York na la kota himacha. Hello, my relatives. I shake your hands in a good way. My Indian name is Goodhawk. I'm an enrolled member of the Matinecock Nation of New York, and I'm also a Lakota. I'm with the Native American Rights Fund. I'm their development director and House Counsel. And before I begin, I want to really thank, again, our co-sponsors, the Tribal Nations of Arizona, 4 Directions Native Vote, and the Coalition of Large Tribes. Before we begin, I don't know if everybody knows about the Native American Rights Fund and our work in the voting rights arena in Indian country in general. But for those of you who don't know, NARF was founded in 1970 and led by our executive director, John Echohawk. And it's the premier legal organization that has, for the past 54 years, provided legal representation and advice on major issues of importance to Indian tribes, Native organizations, and Native individuals nationwide who might otherwise have gone without adequate legal representation. NARF has successfully assisted and defended the most important rights of Indians and tribes in literally hundreds of major cases and has achieved significant results in such critical areas as tribal sovereignty, treaty rights, natural resource protection, voting rights, Indian education, and expanding tribal sovereignty. NARF has headquarters in Boulder, Colorado, with satellite offices in Anchorage, Alaska, and in Washington, D.C. You know, one of the major focuses of the Native American Rights Fund is the protection of Native human rights. And the right to vote and to participate in the democratic process is also a human right. In 2013, the U.S. Supreme Court invalidated an entire section of the Voting Rights Act. And NARF and other civil rights organizations like 4 Directions took action and founded the Native American Voting Rights Act Coalition. And the coalition began working on a congressional amendment that would have restored protections for minority voices, as well as reviewing the laws of many states who have enacted laws that could impact the ability of Native people to vote or even register to vote. Over the past several years, we've seen more and more efforts on the parts of state legislatures to interfere with our voting rights and interfere with United States citizens to register to vote or to actually interfere with the very act of voting itself. This is not only happening to Native people, but also to other communities of color who are experiencing similar issues as we are. We're living in a time where it seems more and more like American democracy is slipping towards minority rule, and you don't have to think long or hard to figure out why. Additionally, as more Native people and people of color are beginning to run for public office, we are hearing that they too are having to climb over obstacles that are being placed in their paths as they try to run for public office. Our panel today will be highlighting some of these issues, the obstacles these folks are facing, and hopefully introduce some strategies on how we can push back against the effort to suppress our rights as American citizens to participate in this political process. Joining me today are our panelists, Dr. Janine Abrams Williams McLean from Faircount, May Tuamankala from the Arizona Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders for Equity, Lycia Ortega from Thunderbird Strategic, Steve Cisneros from 4 Directions, Brett Healy from 4 Directions, and Donna Siemens from 4 Directions. So welcome, panel, and thank you for joining us today. I'll let you each talk a little bit about who you are and your organizations before we kind of get started on our questions. So May, do you want to start?
Oh, okay, yes.
There you go.
Hi, everyone. My name is May Tuamankala, pronouns she, they, and I am the Advocacy Director at NHPI for Equity. And I'm also very excited to be here. I think, having this conversation, bridging our communities together is very important. And our organization's mission and vision is to be a part of that broader racial justice movement here in Arizona. So I'm really proud to be that.
Awesome. Well, Gamadat Venti, Venya Pramul, Lycia Ortega, Mapi Panyanyum, Nyatsnyahab Skaman Squatsan, Nipshamul Nahar Nahar. Greetings, I'm Lycia Ortega. I'm from the Quezon people, born for the Turtle Clan. I'm here representing Thunderbird Strategic, and I'm also here as a close partner of Four Directions and the Native American Rights Fund. We've been doing work together since 2019 in a variety of capacities, and specifically when I served as the first ever Vice President of External Affairs at the National Congress of American Indians, and was able to not only support a lot of these organizations in the room today and probably watching through many grants that were at the generous donation of the Coulter Foundation, but I have a passion for civic engagement and have a wide network that I work with to still get out the Native vote.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Janine Abrams-McLean. I'm the president at Fair Count. Fair Count, we are a nonpartisan nonprofit, and we focus on all things democracy. We were first founded by Stacey Abrams to make sure that everyone was counted in the census, because we understand that the census is the bedrock of our democracy. And we then expanded our work into redistricting and into voting. And one of the things that we primarily focus on is making sure that we have a fair democracy for especially people of color in rural communities. And so I'm very happy to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Good afternoon. My name is Brett Healy. I'm a consultant and chief operating officer for Four Directions. But one of the great honors of my life as a non-native, as a typical white guy of a certain age, one of the great honors has been working with Barb and O.J. Siemens these past near 25 years for equal access to the ballot. But I also wanted to highlight that hearing Sue Van speak over the lunch hour about the importance of the census work, we got involved with funding from Coulter through NARF to make sure that redistricting in South Dakota didn't end up having to have litigation, and we had great success. We were able to, through advocacy, make folks see the light, if you will, in South Dakota, and therefore the maps got drawn in a fair way, and in fact, in a way that we typically like to go fight in court and whatnot. There was no litigation that could be brought because they did the right thing, and that's a credit to the Coulter Foundation for providing that ability to hit every one of the field hearings, to go to the state capitol, to be pushing the committees as they were adopting those maps to do the right thing. Secondly, in that same vein, one of the successes we had starting in 2018 and 2020 was working with the Asian development community in Las Vegas, rather. First of all, in 2018, a joint project of the National Congress of American Indians and the Asia Pacific Health Forum to try to bridge those communities in the Las Vegas area, and we hosted several joint events. Simply were able to get then and now Senator Cortez Masto, who wasn't up for election in 2018, but to come to those events, had events at ACDC's headquarters, had events at the Las Vegas Indian Center in moving that together. And the first multicultural panel that we did was in 2020, and it included, who is now, I think, the president or the executive director of ACDC as part of that panel. So that's the importance of bridging these various communities. And one of the things that I learned in regard to the Asian community was that there were, in excess of 200 different dialects and languages. And as we spoke back and forth at that time, that looked an awful lot like Indian country, in which there's hundreds, 574 to be exact, of federally recognized tribes, and that the majority white population too often wants to look at, well, there's Asian Americans and there's Native Americans and they're all the same. And that simply isn't the case, but there are common challenges, and happy to be a part of this work as this goes forward.
Okay, thanks, Brett. Steve?
My name is Steve Cisneros. I work with Four Direction. Got involved with these groups 4 years ago when I worked for a company called Everybody Votes Campaign, but a little bit about myself. A Latino American that hailed from the Homogenous Society of Wichita, Kansas. Have always worked with groups, and like he explained, within the Latino community as well, we're all different. And, whether I work on a number of presidential campaigns and going into cities and really trying to remove the impediments of having us not work together, and how majority communities, it's in their best interest to keep us siloed. But as long as we
educate ourselves and work together and keep our eye on the big picture is really, getting things done in our communities so that we can thrive. And I'm really glad to be a part of this, and I love these conversations. I learn so much every time I'm here.
Great, thank you, Steve.
Good afternoon. My name is Donna Siemens. I am the Director of Grassroots Organization for Four Directions. I've been the grassroots organizer for them for 20 years. My parents are Barb and O.J. Siemens. I am a member of the Rosebud Sioux tribe in South Dakota, and I am excited to build more bridges with more different entities and different people all across the nation, so we can get us working better together.
Great, thank you, Don, and thank you, panel. Appreciate it, and appreciate all of you taking your time today and joining us for this important subject that we're going to be moving forward on. Now, all of you have either worked with people who are running for office, or you've run for office yourselves, or you've been told by community members that they've run into obstacles either registering to vote or voting and actually participating in the process. So let me ask you this two-part question on this one. What are the barriers that each of you in your community or the candidates you worked with faced in order to participate in that electoral process? And how are you overcoming these barriers? How are they overcoming these barriers? And I'm just opening it up to whoever wants to.
Yeah, sure. I can go first. For the NHPI community, it is very similar to the barriers that tribal communities face. I mean, for one, with having over 200 languages and representing so many different nations, so many different cultures, as well as different tribes, because they come from all over the world, language access is a big barrier for us. So what our organization does is create materials for voter education that is in language. For example, our website that has key information about the elections is translated right now in 6 languages, or NHPI languages, and we hope, with more resources, we'll be able to expand that. And of course, taking time off of work, I think financial obligations and issues with needing to take time away from work, traveling from your home or from your work to a polling location is a issue, but I also hear it's a huge barrier with Native communities.
Yeah, and I'll speak to that, just kind of picking up on the American Indian Alaska Native population. So we worked closely when I was at NCAI with NARF, and NARF released a really important report, Obstacles at Every Turn. And essentially, with a coalition of tribal nations from the rural side, was learning about access to the ballot box. Some folks were having to travel more than 90 minutes to either a post office or a ballot box, and that all is easily remedied through good collaboration with the local municipalities, and that was just something that was not happening. Another thing is voter intimidation. Native populations are generally, a lot of rural populations are close in areas that experience extreme racism. And when you're experiencing extreme racism, there is there's a lot of work being done to ensure you don't get to cast your ballot in the first place. So whether it's Native people standing in line after they have taken time off of their work, or they're standing in line with their kids so that they can make sure to participate in the democratic process, they're experiencing a lot of racism in those fronts, and that's just the rural side of things. More than 80% of Native people live in urban areas, and we're geographically dispersed. So there has to be a really targeted system to reach our populations, and that's why it's so important for us to partner with urban Indian organizations, especially those that provide services to Native people, because they are a hub for information, they are trusted messengers, and that was part of our strategy in 2019 and 2020. We wanted to make sure that we were building a network of trusted messengers. And because of the investment in Indian country in the grassroots level, we were able to put out more than 100 mini grants with the funds that we had at NCAI to ensure that these grassroots groups, whether they were rural or urban, were able to put canvassers on the ground, making a livable wage, allowing them to work when they were able to get around, even providing transportation, bus passes, Uber credits, those types of things like that. And it was really a by any means necessary. We knew transportation was an issue, language is an issue, so worked closely with NARF in terms of getting translations taken care of. And it's very interesting in 2020 because all of this was happening in tandem with all of the outreach efforts for the census. And so what happened was we were doing a dual sort of civic engagement strategy where we were talking about the importance of being counted in census, because if we could make sure that our stats were up, our numbers were up, and we could identify where Native populations were, then we could really understand what our political power was in those particular spaces, and we could really go out there in a nonpartisan way and ensure that folks, regardless of their political affiliation or preference, were able to cast their ballot, urban or rural.
Normally, I would talk about voter suppression, which we've already addressed with the first two responses. But one of the things that I've been paying attention to and that Fair Count has really been focused on is the issue and the challenges associated with mis and disinformation in our communities. And I think when we're based in Georgia, but we do national work, and we have a really strong focus on the South. And something that we know is that, in the South, at least 75% of southern counties, over about 12 states in the South, are news deserts, meaning that they have either no or only one local news source, meaning that there's not a trusted voice and not a trusted source of news at the local level. And then when you tie that to the digital divide, and especially in the rural communities that we serve, knowing that a lot of these communities don't have access to the internet, it allows mis and disinformation to run rampant. And so one of the things that we're focused on, we organize 365 days a year. Our organizers are always on the ground talking to communities, and by having those conversations with people, we're able to identify some of the mis and disinformation that is being circulated in those communities, and then we're able to actually correct it. But it's not a long-term strategy. There needs to be a lot more infrastructure put in. There needs to be equitable access to broadband. There needs to be additional sources of trusted information. And one of our friends, Isosa Osa, started an organization called Onyx Impact that is specifically looking at about the sources of misinformation, particularly focused on Black people across the country. And so I think if we have more organizations like that can actually monitor and correct and find these sources and call people out and provide accurate information, that will go a long way.
Trying to be brief because we like to talk about this stuff a long time, and we've got a clock on us. One of the things I wanted to raise is, especially in the West, 2 or 3 big things. One, it's the most dangerous racial discrimination is folks that don't realize they are, and it is the staffing of these county offices, the county commissioners themselves that may recognize overt racial comments and whatnot, but don't understand that they bring those biases to work with them, and it informs the choices they make, how they treat people. They don't treat the Native voters as well as they treat the white voters, and it may not be a conscious choice they make. It may be something running in the background. Added to that is, particularly since over the last 40 years, as the country's moved to more and more mail voting, early voting, you no longer are going to the election precinct on election day. And by doing that, by dragging in where the county seat matters and what the postal system looks like matters, we're dragging relics from the 1800s into the third decade of the 21st century in terms of the postal system isn't the same in rural white areas as it is in rural Native areas. Certainly not the same as it is in urban areas. But beyond that, most every county seat selection made in the west of the Mississippi River, was made at a time prior to the 1924 Citizenship Act. So we've dragooned that unequal postal system as part of the ballot delivery mechanism in the third decade of the 21st century, and it simply is something that we're not going to invest enough money to make postal system equal. We've got to find a way to make sure that it doesn't affect voting in an unequal way.
Two of the things that, examples that were discussed that I learned firsthand being up at the Navajo Fair, just getting them the proper information. It was like handing them something of value, like letting them know what dates they can vote and the proper, accurate locations of where they're voting. I mean, we were, having them fill out a survey, and then more people would just come to get that accurate information. And then when they talk about, stories that are in the media, I read a lot when I started working with Brett, and I kind of got called on the carpet yesterday when, I said, gave out the statistics I'd read. Well, they were wrong. And this woman, she read me the Riot Act, and she, informed me with the proper information to the point where I had to apologize to her. But it's that kind of thing that everyone's talking about that I've seen firsthand. And here's an earnest human being coming here and wanting to do the right things. But when you have the wrong information, you can really offend the wrong people. People that, like everyone up here, they do this every day. They might get paid, but they're not paid enough. It's still pretty much volunteer. So that's my example.
The biggest problem we have, not only is it racism, but it's trying to get an outreach program to have potential voters or young voters able to register to vote or do it without having any hurdles or any, because it's really hard to, when you get discouraged from registering to vote or being able to vote, you're not going to go back into the office and do, or wherever you're supposed to go and do it again. So if we have a strong group of people able to help individuals be able to register to vote, we'll have a higher turnout and we'll have a better democracy and more involved people, young ones, old ones. In our community, it works with aunties, so it would be the aunties making sure that the young ones and the elders are able to vote or vote equally or without any trouble. And I think we have many stories on unequal access or what we've done to make it equal enough that they can vote on at least on their own land.
Wow, you guys, it's pretty amazing to me in that in each of your communities, you've all mentioned a variety of obstacles to whether it's registering to vote, voting itself, even knowing what to vote about or on because of language issues, things like that. What I find equally interesting and amazing is that each one of you and each one of your communities are finding workarounds to that, whether it's physically developing voter information in multiple languages, whether it's doing grassroots organizing of getting people in caravans to go to the polls, registering, and then bringing them back again when it comes time to vote. Dealing with just the inherent ignorance and racism in a lot of communities. And that's the most dangerous type, right? That you're so racist you don't even know it. It's so ingrained. So what I'm really interested in right now is we did a great job in listing all these obstacles, and we talked a little bit, scratched the surface a little bit on how we deal with it, because I'm sure each one of you, like Brett, can go into a lot of detail about how we address those issues. Sorry, Brett. But what I'm interested in hearing from everyone is those are our issues which are almost identical, but we're talking about in our siloed communities. And I believe it was your sister Stacy that was talking about it yesterday, right? That's great. If the native vote has X number of thousands of votes. The Hispanic vote has X number of thousands of votes. How do we bring all these voters together? How do we, when I say join our communities, not into one big happy giant community, but how do we relay our commonalities, identify our common enemies, and how do we band together to overcome that so our collective voice can be heard over the dominant voices? Anybody who wants to, I'm sure you all have different ideas, but I'm interested in all of them.
I think we have to talk to each other. And it's you know, and I think that we need to be very deliberate about being thoughtful partners. A lot of time, especially with minority communities, we come at things with a scarcity mentality, meaning that if we're doing the same work, or if I do something similar to you, that I'm taking resources from you. There's a whole lot of work that has to be done. And if we come in with that scarcity mentality and we're fighting against each other, then we're not going to get the work done. So one of the things that Fair Count does is we're very deliberate about being real partners, not coming in and telling people this is how Fair Count does it, you need to do this way. We come in and we listen to people, and then we talk to people and talk to other groups to figure out how we can help each other. And I think that's the first thing. You know, I love working with 4 Directions. My homeboy OJ out there, and Barb. But I really, you know, it's identifying, and one of the things that I really appreciate about 4 Directions is that when we get to know each other and get to know each other's work, we see that we have shared histories of oppression, but we also see that we have shared opportunities for success and prosperity in the future, but we have to work together to get it done.
I think for us, you know, we are part of a state table called One Arizona, and we are often working in coalition. Like, when you look at my workday, I probably have about 3 coalition meetings a day, but I'm making sure that, you know, we are hearing all communities' perspective when it comes to policies that are being introduced, any type of issues that communities are experiencing. For example, we did find out that the gang enhancement law that takes place in Arizona targets Black communities, and we learned this through working with a organization called the Tadini House, where their mission is to assist families who are going through criminal charges, or their loved ones are going through criminal charges. And the director saw that for all the Black families that she helped, majority of them had this gang enhancement sentencing attached to their convictions. So together, our whole coalition created a policy called Arizona Communities First Act, and that was about creating a department in the legislature to analyze how policies would impact certain demographics, certain communities, and to use that as a tool before passing that policy. So then, you know, racial disparities would be addressed. And those are just ways that we can work together, but we have to learn about each other's issues first before we can really start making real change.
Yeah, I think to piggyback off that, May and I had this. We had our own panel yesterday at our tribal reception about just this. You know, if your community is talking about climate, bring in Indigenous stewards and knowledge holders. We are the first scientists, we are the first doctors, we are the first astronomers, and we should be the first on your mind if you're gonna have conversations about anything natural resource related. And that just goes across the board too. And just to pull up a little bit, you know, back in 2020, we entered a reckoning in our lifetime. We are in a reckoning right now. We are in a movement right now. And there wasn't any of us cross-racially, cross-culturally, that didn't stand up for Black Lives Matter. We stood up because we all understand that police brutality not on our watch, not in our communities. We all decided to take a stand against racism at all because in our own ways we were experiencing it during the pandemic and even pre-pandemic. We had, in Georgia, in California, we had Asian American salons being shot up with, these racist folks. We had, school violence all of the time, and it's racially motivated. And so those are opportunities to join in solidarity with one another, and we really showed up for one another in those spaces, and we created, as you mentioned, the coalitions around some of these issues, and now is not the time to stop. Now is the time to ramp it all up because, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of times when we hear statistics about American Indian Alaska Native people, they talk about the low percentage and they call us statistically insignificant or something else, but we are politically significant. And when we get together and work on something, then we can create empowerment for everyone around us, and reciprocity is a value that Native people have generally. And just to speak about something that, that folks have been working on for a really long time, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. It is sitting on a table somewhere, and there's coalitions working in the background, night and day to make sure that it doesn't get kicked out of another bill and that we're tucking it into another bill, and we're able to see what implementation looks like, because everyone's voting rights are at stake if we don't get that bill passed.
I just want to say that I am very grateful for Four Directions bringing us all together like this as a collective voice so we can learn about each other's things. This is how we're going to change things in history and how we're going to make racism something of the past, because we all are going to work together and make sure that we have strong bonds and one strong voice. And I'm very grateful to be part of the team.
Else? Oh, that's okay. We got a few more minutes. Panel, thanks. Let me just kind of synopsize what we just briefly talked about today. Number one is we're involved in a movement right now, okay? And it's a big movement, and it goes through all our communities. And probably the next step would be to join in that movement, all our communities join together and not do it as siloed entities. 2045 is coming. That's when the white majority is not going to be the white majority anymore. It's going to be something else, whatever that may be. More and more natives and people of color are holding state and federal offices. Fear is motivating the actions against our communities, and that's what we've been hearing. That's really the sub-root of it all. Why do they want us to keep us from voting? We have to be stronger together. We have to work together. We have to build allies and remember, as our Native communities and also of other communities, we all descend from warriors. We all have that heart, and we need to remember that when we're going to do something or exercise something that's inherently ours, we do it with our heads held high because we have a right to do it. We don't submit to intimidation. Voting doesn't mean becoming a lesser member of our communities. It's not going to diminish our tribal sovereignty. It'll increase our tribal sovereignty. We need to educate our families. We need to educate our fellow tribal members as to why it's so important for Indian country to vote. We have a lot at stake, especially with this election coming up. Every community represented here has something to offer, every single one. And all our communities, regardless, are beautiful. And to make the world a better place for our future generations, we need to come together individually, as our own communities, and as our collective communities to participate in this process to make that happen. Panel, I got all this from you guys today. Tremendous insight, and I know we could probably talk on and on about it more. But let me ask one word, if you can just sum up what we just talked about today from each of you.
Power. Unity.
Two powerful words, two very, very important words. And that probably sums it up right there, is power and unity and power through unity. So with that, I don't know, OJ, do we have any? Oh, I'm sorry.
Mine's kind of two words, but since I've been here, I've learned by watching who you mentioned, and how to ingratiate people into this. I'd love to see this, packed with Latino folks, Asian folks. But the one thing I see is it's just full of love. And yeah, we're warriors and we come from this, but we shouldn't fight. We should, with the love of our hearts, want to make this a better place and want to bring people in. And that's really what it's about. Like when I see OJ and his wife walk, oh my God, what a message. That's what I want. And then he, through that and their family, they're bringing us all together.
Yep, absolutely. And really to kind of really build on the traditional values that Four Directions and other Native organizations follow, right? To be a good warrior, you also have to be compassionate. You have to have, it's two sides to the same coin. So you can be fierce, but you also have to have that compassion and that love for each other. So that's a great point, Steve. Thank you. That's good. OJ, do we have time for if the audience has any questions or anything? I think it was part of the plan. I think the whole idea, and let me let the panel address that. I know what my answer is, but let me see if anybody on the panel wants to address that.
Of course, it was about that, and I'll give you a specific example. Montana, after the Citizenship Act of 1924 was passed, they very promptly deregistered everybody of every race, of every county, of every voter roll, and then made everybody re-register as a tactic to make sure that the newly empowered citizens really didn't have a pathway to get to the voting box. And clearly, the difference between land and trust, land that was in fee patent, the checkerboarding of reservations that had already happened mostly by 1924, that Native vote couldn't roll that. And to this day, looking at across the High Line of Montana, you have the Blackfeet Nation, the Glacier County portion of that, where tribal voters have taken over the levers of county government, and they have full equality for in-person voting under Montana's scheme in a way that other counties that are still run by mostly old white guys and young white guys haven't got there. And it's always about the land, and it's always about they don't want to admit that great-granddad maybe didn't get the land on the level.
Yeah, I think the whole idea of giving a citizenship was to do just that. Part of it was what Brett just said, and I think about it at the time, the 1920s. The goal of assimilation was very much alive, relocation, turning people into yeoman farmers. That's what the whole boarding school theories were about. And so if you start to do that, citizenship becomes the logical next step. Because once you're an American citizen, you're subject to all federal laws, including a way to get around the treaty obligations. Because eventually the idea was to diminish or eliminate the reservations, get people off of it. We saw what happened during the relocation eras. So yeah, I think it was in the taxation piece, to answer your question, OJ, I think it was a major part of that, along with several other parts, to make Indian country and Indian people disappear.
I just want
Any other questions?
I just want to react to that. I mean, just hearing that information, it really sounds exactly what Pacific Islanders are going through right now. And, when I think about AANHPI, we're talking about Native Hawaiians as well, who are, Native people. So I really do feel like our communities really have a lot in common. We have the same fights, and I'm just so excited to make these partnerships today. So yeah.
Great, thanks, May. Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of commonality. We just have to learn that from each other. Yeah. Any other questions? Anybody? Okay, well, I think with that panel, thank you so much for your time, your knowledge, your wisdom, and your love and compassion. And thank you, audience. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Don.
Yeah. Okay, I know what your watches and clocks are saying, and I want to tell you that it's wrong, because according to our agenda, it is now 1:30. And so with that, I want to, I think she was just up here. We're going to have a panel. It's on protecting natural resources. And Lucia, if you can come back up here and we can start that panel. You don't want to? Okay. Won't be the first time she told me what to do. No. You know, one of the things while I'm waiting is, you know, Four Directions has been here for 20 plus years. But one of the things that we've always done, when we go into on a reservation, we go there and we don't take 100 people. We learned our lesson from other campaigns. We go there and we hire the local tribal members. And what we do that makes it pretty tough, if you live on a reservation, first thing you're gonna find out is the people you work with, 90% of them do not have a bank account. They do not have any type of checking account. And so when we go there, we hire individuals, but we pay them cash at the end of the day. So I always say that Four Directions not only empowers people, but at the end of the day, we put food on their table. And when we leave, we don't take and say, Four Directions did this. We started this organization to give the tribes and the tribal members the power to take and sit at that table. And so when we go somewhere, we don't go there and say, this is Four Directions. We go there and we say, this is the tribe, this is the tribal members, and this is what we're doing. And when it's all over said and done, it's the tribes and the tribal members that get that recognition and get to sit at that table. And that's what we envisioned 20 years ago. And to this day, we're doing it. So a lot of times people say, Four Directions, never heard of them. It's because we take in what we do, we make sure the tribes get the credit for that. So. Okay. Okay. Did you tell Lucia? All right, I just found out another good thing about Indian country, we know how to be resilient and adapt and change stuff around when needed to. So we actually have a panel 6 we're going to move, so we're getting close to the actual time at 2:45. Do not look at your watch. And we are going to do our missing relatives and the worldwide epidemic and the push for more law enforcement resources. And so I'd like to have Jennifer Whittle. Hi, see, another one. Disappears on me. Oh, there she is.
Can we take a short break so I can give the council delegates
Yeah. Let's take a 1-minute break. Take what, 5? Yeah. Take 5. Here is my agenda. Huh.
If I can get a hold of you, Jenny. Sorry. Okay.
All right, come on.
but I have to say that's really interesting. So,
Change these real quick.
For giving us a few minutes to provide a presentation on the National Fund for Excellence in American Indian Education, which is known as the fund. But while we're waiting for the PowerPoint to, oh, there it is. My name is Lashana So. I'm the Senior Director of Community Partnerships and Government Relations with One Generation Fund.
Amba washtemi dagi abi daiwachim nega hudeshana would open us asitwa wakbetua ihanktuana na ia shijaja macha shajemi tawo hismak bieje magyabi. My name's Heidi McDonald and I'm from the Fort Peck Tribes in Montana and I'm the Senior Policy Director for One Generation. So the National Fund, it's a congressionally chartered organization, and we're dedicated to leveraging resources to improve the educational outcomes and opportunities for our BIE students. The fund really supports community-led efforts related to language and cultural revitalization. And the fund is also committed to ensuring every BIE student has access to native language, culture, and academic rigor. The National Fund, it was originally established in 2000 under the Clinton administration. They had some legal issues with, they had to change their name, and there was a statutory amendment that was required in 2004. From 2004 to 2007, they created a board, and Lorraine Edmo from the Shoshone-Bannock tribes in Idaho. She was the executive director of the fund, but they had a lot of challenges related to a change in the federal administration at the time. The Department of the Interior at the time also wouldn't transfer the funds over to the fund, so they had other challenges related to that. So the fund, it went dormant in 2007, But in 2014, the BIE study group, among its recommendations, they wanted to relaunch the fund to build a public-private partnership to support the BIE students. In 2022, Secretary Holland, she prioritized the fund, and they announced the relaunch of the fund at the 2022 Tribal Nation Summit. Since then, we have successfully created a board, and the board is, the leadership of the board, Kara Barbroff, we're here on her behalf today. She's the chairperson of the board. She's Danae Lakota. She's based in Albuquerque. Mr. Regis Pecos, he's from Cochiti Pueblo. He's the vice chair. And Cecilia Fire Thunder, she's Ogallala Lakota from South Dakota. And these are the leaders of the board of directors. But the full membership, the majority of the board of directors are from the Southwest region of the United States. Besides Kara and Regis, we also have Dr. Curtis Chavez. He's from the Cochiti Pueblo. He leads the Kara's Children's Learning Center at Cochiti Pueblo. We have Delegate Shauna Ann Claw from the Navajo Nation. She's on the Navajo Nation Council. And we also have Larissa Garcia from Acmo Pueblo. So a lot of representation for our BIE students down in the southwest part of the country. Among the fund's priorities, they really want to focus on Indigenous school redesign through an Indigenous lens, programs and practices to improve academic outcomes for our BIE students. They want to expand the Indigenous teacher pipeline, and the most important thing, supporting the growth of community-based Indigenous language revitalization programs. I'm going to pass it to LaShawna.
Thanks, Heidi. As Heidi had mentioned, the fund was established to support BIE schools, and this is done by raising money through public, private, and philanthropic sources. The fund raised can provide innovative ways to support language culture that would not go directly to school systems. It would also provide an avenue to advocate and raise awareness on how we can improve educational outcomes for Native students. To support the work of the fund, technical amendments to the fund is required. So the law right now is restrictive on how the fund can be used. The amendments that we're asking for tribal leaders and communities to support would allow for cost reimbursement flexibility, authorization to carry out appropriations for fiscal year 2025 through 2030 of up to $5 million per year. Would also allow the use of the funds for reasonable and customary administrative expenses of the foundation and eliminate the inflexible 10% cap. The fund allows it would also allow funds to remain available until expended by the foundation. So far, we've received letters of support from Choctaw Nation, Navajo Nation, Cherokee Nation, and the Coalition of Large Tribes. In the works are letters of support from Choctaw and the All Pueblo Councils of Governors of New Mexico. And for the tribes that are here who have not provided that support, we strongly urge you and your tribal councils to support this amendment. We are happy to provide a presentation to garner that support, and this letter of support would go to members of Congress, Representative Cole, Representative McCollum, Senator Schultz, and Senator Murkowski, and others that you feel should be added to the letter. We've also provided a template for your letter of support, so if you are interested, that letter is drafted. We can share with your tribal councils or tribal organizations. If you'd like to learn more about the fund itself, please, you can access that information through the websites here. One Generation Fund, which is where Heidi and I are both representing, is the first QR code. The second is the National Fund for Excellence in American Indian Education. And this is our contact information if you want to reach out to us to request that presentation to your tribal councils. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'll be here for the remainder of the presentations. And that is it. Thank you.
Can you move that? They're taped together. Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Weddle. I'm a Northern Cheyenne attorney based out of Denver, Colorado, and I have the honor and privilege of being one of the attorneys for COLT, the Coalition of Large Tribes. Could we bring up the Zoom on the big screen so we can introduce our COLT leaders who are on? So we're joined on this panel on our missing and murdered Indigenous relatives and public safety by two tremendous leaders in Indian country, council delegates from the Navajo Nation, Council Delegate Eugenia Charles Newton, and Council Delegate Amber Crotty, together, and they'll introduce themselves more fulsomely, but they've been really the tip of the spear in addressing significant funding shortfalls, policy issues, heading up the Navajo Nation Council Law and Order Committee and their Navajo Nation's MMIP response efforts as well. And I'm hoping that we have them on sound, and I'm looking at the folks in the back of the room to see if we can get our two council delegates pinned so they can come on camera and be heard by the room. Council delegates, can you hear us? Okay, yes. Should we be able to hear them? Yes, we hear you. Thank you, Council Delegate. Yes, we can. Thank you, Council Delegate. Would you please introduce yourself to our room full of tribal leaders? Yes.
As long as we can hear each other, right? We're probably a little bit to listen to each other anyways.
This is the Native Candidate Forum, and we can hear you. You are live in the room. Yes. That's good. Comedy is really killing it here in the room, so keep it up. Council Delegate Charles Newton, we'll start with you. Would you please introduce yourself to the tribal leaders? And Council Delegate Crotty?
Oh, perfect. Yate Shibana Express, Kia Ani Nesledo, Viking people, Bashis team, Destiny, Deshachedo, Irish people, Desanole, Shay Amber, Kinasba Crotty, Yanisia, Toha Poide, Natsha. So I come from the eastern territories of the Navajo Nation. I've been a council delegate for the past 9 years. I've chaired the Sexual Assault Prevention Subcommittee. I now chair the Missing and Murdered and Their Relatives task force on the Navajo Nation and a member of the Budget and Finance Committee, and was recently part of the Federal Not Invisible Act Commission. And so I appreciate all of the leadership in the room and the invitation to talk about our collective goal of protecting our missing and murdered relatives and how their lives and their stories matter. And looking forward to this deep conversation on not just making this, just because it's a hot topic, but understanding how dramatically this has impacted us as Natives since the time of contact and how it continues to impact our children. So I appreciate the opportunity.
And I need to have the host enable participant screen sharing, please.
And Ms. Weddle, just so you are aware, as well as those in the room, we also have on the line with myself and Delegate Crotty, the Navajo MMIP liaison. Her name is Racita Billy. She is leading the efforts with the Navajo Nation Police Department under the Division of Public Safety for the Navajo Nation. So she is listening in and she is on the line in case we need somebody to back us up.
That is wonderful. Thank you, Council Delegate. Can we get screen sharing enabled, please, technical staff? Because what I want to bring up and share is a COLT presidential advocacy document. It's our presidential platform material that we've been able to share again and again. And the Navajo Nation Council delegates have been at the heart of that advocacy, working with the executive branch as well as other political outreach, trying to solve first a massive funding problem for the public safety crisis that we have in Indian country, where Indian country is funded at just a tiny percentage of need. So I've brought up on the screen COLT's presidential platform priorities, and we shared this at both major political conventions. Number one on the list is public safety, and it always has been, followed by trauma healing to address the legacy of boarding schools, and then creating a more level playing field for tribal economic development. And Del talked a lot about number three and the efforts there on the GWE effort and the tax efforts. But this goes exactly to why voting matters. Getting the right people in the room to address these really historic legacy problems. We know in Indian country that our problems stem in large part, and I'm going to try to zoom in a little on this so that you can see it better, but they stem in large part from the U.S. Supreme Court's 1978 decision in a case called Oliphant versus Suquamish Tribe, where the court ruled that tribal courts have no jurisdiction over non-Indians because that's inconsistent with our status as conquered people. So it left tribes with no ability to engage really in public safety, put criminal policing decisions really in the hands of the federal government, not state governments, and left us largely without the means to protect ourselves. COLT has participated in the last several years to craft a legislative solution to that, which we're hoping to get introduced soon, and there's unanimity around that from almost all of the tribal orgs. But the focus of a lot of our advocacy recently has been on the budget formulation process, or the broken hamster wheel, as our Vice Chairman Tracy Ching King refers to it, where you all as tribal leaders are asked routinely to identify your budget priorities and pick, which part of your family is most essential to you, and make these impossible choices given the continuous historic shortfalls in funding. The federal government is required to report on how Indian country's law and order needs are being met or not. Their most recent report came in March of this year. It's a Tribal Law and Order Act report, a TLOA report, that the BIA Office of Justice Services produces. The most recent report is for the 2021 fiscal year. And there, they say right on page 1 in the first paragraph, and I'm going to zoom in a little more so you can see it. Overall, Indian Country BIA Public Safety and Justice is funded at just under 13% of total need. And an additional 25,655 personnel are required to adequately serve Indian Country. So we're about 90% underfunded, and we need 26,000 more officers just to get us to the same officer equivalency that other rural communities employ as a baseline. And they're in communities without our jurisdictional issues. So our need is probably actually much higher than this to get 2.8 officers per 1,000 members of the service population. On cult member tribes reservations, you will often have maybe only 2 or 3 officers, not 2 or 3 per shift, 2 or 3 officers who are available to patrol a land-based area the size of the states of Rhode Island, or in the Navajo Nation's case, the size of West Virginia. Those officers are always underpaid, often undertrained, difficult to retain, and often not from the communities and met with a lot of lack of trust and other issues. So we know from this TLOA report that we're about $3 billion short on public safety and justice funding for Indian Country. And yet, in the fiscal year 2025 budget from the president, his starting place was to suggest a total Indian Country public safety budget of $651.2 million. So even the White House is starting at just 20% of need. And the council delegates, the other cult leaders go from room to room in Washington, from the executive branch to the legislative branch, and back around saying, how do we get this number to be bigger? Where do we start? You know, going to the appropriations staff, going to the administration, going to DOI, going to the OMB, and everybody kind of points the finger at someone else, and we always end up stuck at this 13% of need place. Council Delegate Charles Newton also co-chairs the Tribal Interior Budget Committee Public Safety Subcommittee. And this is an issue that she's been raising again and again and again, very forcefully in the TBIC meetings to try to get focus on this issue and to get us off the dime. And the federal officials' response is usually, well, if we fully fund public safety, then we have to take from something else, some other priority. We know we need $3 billion for public safety and justice, but all of BIA is funded at $2.8 billion. So we're not even in the universe of what we need to meet our needs. There are many other bureaucratic and administrative challenges to the delivery of justice, but the Navajo Nation has been doing some really incredible work in data collection, in sharing that information, in getting data to tell their story in these meetings in Washington. So I want to turn back to our council delegates to talk about what they've been doing, their work, and what's next steps for them in this very important voting cycle.
I will let Delegate Crotty start off, since she has been pushing an initiative through in terms of collecting data, and it's a higher step than what I've been doing, so I'll let her explain. Delegate Crotty?
Oh, yeah, thank you, Shade. Eugenia is, Delegate Charles Newton is my older sister by clan, and so we always try to greet one another, and so for all of our relatives that are in the room. I think in terms of giving the backstory on why the priority is so important when it comes to public safety, I wear this scarf every day for Ashlyn Mike, who we lost back in 2016. Ashlyn was a lovely, young, vibrant 12-year-old who was playing after she was dropped off by her school bus driver with her brother. And in 2016, a predator approached Ashlyn and her brother and kidnapped them and took them to an isolated area. And ultimately, Ian was let go and recovered, but we lost Ashlyn. And in that moment, it magnified the type of services that are not provided in Indian country on a regular basis, especially when it comes to Amber Alert and the abduction of children, when it comes to prioritizing an E911 system, and looking at how we can do preventative work in our communities. So from those discussions and the need for the public, in their bravery and in their courage, her family, Pamela Foster, her mother, and Gary Mike advocated for the Ashen Mike in Indian country, Amber Alert. And so that's one of the key areas where we're focused and honing in on gaps of service in Indian country, and why we're looking at these multi-jurisdiction issues, forward funding, and it appears that Indian country always has to face the brunt of a federal budget that doesn't value the lives of our relatives. And so with that in mind, and in the spirit of Ashland, and making sure not one child goes missing on the Navajo Nation, we're this collective movement of survivors, of matriarchs, are telling our stories. And at first, in working with our federal partners, they felt that some of these areas, like human trafficking, was not happening on the Navajo Nation. And so we had to turn to our families and get firsthand accounts of what was happening when we looked at why we had young children with suicidal ideation, what were some of the dynamics of that trauma, and looking at like their adverse childhood experience, and then building up data from a community-based perspective. And so our challenge here was, at that time, our federal partners, FBI, even our own Navajo Nation Police Department, had felt that these issues were not the priorities at the time. And so we had to work with families to make that a priority, and work with different organizations, like members of NCAI, like members of COLT, working with other groups in Canada to really tell our story and to be united. So a lot of our time was spent in just collecting the information so the federal entity would believe that this was happening. I happened to testify in front of the U.S. Senate hearing on violence in our communities and our missing and murdered Indigenous women in 2018, when we still had Senator Udall as a strong advocate. And it was a sheer shock when we had our FBI agents provide testimony. And at that time, they felt that there was enough agents in Indian country, when I was coming from a community that was enraged with the lack of support when it comes down to just arrest, communication, getting evidence processed through Quantico. And then also, we had our BIA partners in the room. And after they testified, FBI left the room. And I told Senator Tesler, I said, this is the experience that we continue to face with our federal law enforcement, that they're not willing to sit down at the table, hear what our challenges are, and then work collectively to say, how can we provide the appropriate funding that they need, and then how they could work with our tribal nations. And so from that conversation and working with then Representative Deb Haaland, working with the families and seeing that Savannah's Act was passed, that Invincible Act was passed, we also then saw also this co-op in the movement. And so folks in DC felt then they wanted to tell us, the community in Indian country, how to address the issue. And so we've also had to stand firm in what the response looks like at home. And so how not only we want the families to be included, and why it's vital to have survivor-led and our matriarchs be part of that healing, that's where we had this community-based approach. And now what we're able to do is to look at not only the lack of federal funding, because right now we're targeting public safety, but there's also a decline in our Office of Victims of Crime tribal set-asides. And so 3 years ago, the Navajo Nation may have received just over $2 million to address the challenges here at home. This year, I think we're looking at a reduction, huge reduction of about maybe 200,000. And so as Ms. Billy can attest, in collecting this information, we have just about 60 Navajo relatives who are currently missing. We do currently work with the FBI policy analysts, and so we're understanding some of the challenges in communication. I know we're working with U.S. Attorney's Office liaisons, but we also want to make sure that we don't have to continue to retell our story and that they're scaling up to meet the needs of our people. Something that happened last year was our relatives were targeted in a border town called Gallup, New Mexico. And they were targeted, they were promised housing, they were promised to be taken care of, and it was these predatory treatment centers that used, their vulnerability to traffic them down to Phoenix area. And that was another area where at first law enforcement really didn't understand the dynamics. We got into like some state issues, jurisdiction issues. Where was this individual last seen? Who would take on the investigation? And finally, we had to deploy our own Navajo Nation police down to Metro Phoenix to do investigations to help recover our relatives who were down there. That's gonna probably be one of the biggest white collar crimes in the state of Arizona. Billions and billions of dollars were extracted based on our relatives, and their IDs were taken from them. They were threatened. They were introduced to other substances, and now we're faced with this challenge of working with all of the different entities on how we restore that justice and that harmony to those relatives, and just working in the limited capacity that we're in. So it is an ongoing issue that continues to impact all of our children. Yesterday, we had a community rally in recognizing Every Child Matters and the experience of boarding school, and we're still trying to recover our relatives who lost their lives in those institutions, and that federal trust responsibility. And looking just at the jurisdiction here on Navajo Nation, because of the Major Crimes Act, I'm sure you may have discussed the limitations for tribes. So if the U.S. attorney declines a case, which has been an ongoing issue as a Navajo Nation, where the federal government only allows us at maximum to prosecute and to sentence an individual for heinous crimes a year, and maybe 6 additional months if a child was involved. And that is ridiculous if we're in a system where federal FBI will not fully investigate or the crimes are declined. So on the Navajo Nation part, we are invested into building up our Major Crimes Unit, our Office of Victims of Crime, and we're using community-based and partner-based advocates, and we're working with our medical and behavioral health partners. And so I hope that gives you a glimpse in terms of the magnitude and how this has impacted our communities, and using some, or building in, some of the DNA capabilities. We are able to recover some of our relatives, but for many years, I myself am a family member of a missing relative, and it took me 8 years for the DNA to finally be processed. And there's no reason for a family to have to wait that long for answers. And so I just appreciate the time, and what we need is an investment into our public safety system, and also a way for tribes to be able to protect their relatives. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Council Delegate. It's really inspiring to see all that the Navajo Nation has going on, both in terms of making the push for federal efforts, but also pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps and investing our own resources in those investigative tools, increasing our training availability, increasing our own communications tools and networks to try to make sure that what happened to Ashlyn doesn't happen to other daughters. And I want to give a special shout out at this point to just thank CKP Insurance, which has been an incredible sponsor and partner to Colt on some of this work, including an MMIW cold case training that we did in Billings just about a year ago, where we had about 87 officers come in to receive totally free training that they could then take back to their communities, and that wouldn't have been possible at all without CKP Insurance's support. They know this is our #1 issue. It has nothing to do with insurance, but they know how important it is to their tribal clients. And just thank you to Chuck Hemphill and all of CKP for your incredible leadership and partnership with Indian Country on that. And I'll turn next to Council Delegate Charles Newton.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And I always, so Delegate Crotty is the leading, I guess, the delegate who's been leading the efforts with MMIP, along with Racita Billy, who just now turned on her camera. So I rely on them in terms of data and the information coming out of MMIP, which is why I thought it would be great to give Delegate Crotty kind of that opportunity in terms of what she's been working on and how much knowledge she has when it comes to the Navajo Nation. But in terms of data and numbers, this is what we are facing. We have roughly 400,000 Navajos who are enrolled in our tribe. We're looking at possibly about half of them, maybe around 200,000, who have moved back to the Navajo Nation because of COVID and because of what had happened during that time with COVID, with unemployment, and then also people losing homes, losing their apartments because they weren't able to work. So all of that happened. Our land base is 27,000 square miles. We expanded, we're in, I guess, in 3 states, New Mexico, Arizona. We have about 218 Navajo police officers, when we technically should have 560 based on what the national average is, which is 2.8 officers per 1,000 members of the surface population. So we are very, very far behind. We have 32 criminal investigators who serve as detectives. They also help assist when it comes to our missing, murdered, Diné relatives here on the Navajo Nation. And then when we're talking about the Navajo Nation and what our law enforcement are facing, we're looking at around 250,514 calls for services from 2018 to 2023. That is half of our population. I'll repeat that, 250,514 from 2018 to 2023. Of that, only 21,381 were arrested. These arrests stem from battery of a family member, assault, public intoxication. We have an entire section within our Title 17 that lists all of the crimes that are punishable on the Navajo Nation. Our number of sex offenders right now, our Tier 3 is the largest number of sex offenders that we have at 388 Tier 3 sex offenders on the Navajo Nation. We have 56 Tier 1 sex offenders and 96 Tier 2 sex offenders. This is really alarming, especially in light of the number of police officers that we have on the Navajo Nation. So Racita, who is here on the line, actually helped to collect this information when it comes to our missing and murdered Diné relatives. But right now, out of Arizona, we have 48 open cases, 22 in New Mexico, 1 in Utah. Colorado hasn't submitted their data to us. We have 3 cases out of California and 1 case coming out of the Navajo Nation. I know that Ray Cedar recently updated that information, and she keeps me updated in terms of what we're seeing, because those are the questions that we get asked when we go to the Hill there in Washington. They ask us, what are your numbers? Tell me, how many, when you're talking about officers, we want to know, how many officers do you have? How many do you think you need? How much money are you getting? We started, as the chairwoman of Law and Order Committee, I started collecting data, and I put it together in a book that helps me. So when I go to DC, I'm able to take that book and say, okay, I give them a summary. This is what we're seeing on the Navajo Nation. Here's a book. Here's the information. I also include my card, and I let them know that if you have any questions or you want more detailed information about the data and the numbers that I'm sharing with you today, then please contact me, and I'll be happy to share that information. As far as the declination of federal cases, from 2016 to 2024, we had 525 cases that the Navajo Nation referred to the federal government for prosecution. And 525 of those cases were declined, and that was from 2016 to 2024. 172 of those cases dealt with child sexual assault or abuse, including non-contact offenses, and then other offenses against children. There were 116 that were declined that dealt with assault, which included aggravated assault resulting in serious bodily injury with a deadly or dangerous weapon. That is what we're facing in terms of what we're seeing here on the Navajo Nation. We have a breakdown. We know that from 2018 to 2024, public intoxication was the largest number of cases that were being responded to by law enforcement, and that was at 92,282. These are numbers that we're collecting. And again, it's information that we're sharing. And because we're starting to share this information, it's starting to open eyes at the federal government. It also helps us to correct the information that is being shared by the federal government themselves. And I say that because the Navajo Nation is pushing for what's called a medical legal team, which includes a medical examiner and a coroner's position. There's no tribe in the entire United States that has a dedicated medical examiner or coroners that's dedicated to a particular tribe. Navajo has been pushing that and has been asking that these positions be created, and that they be created under a 638 contract, which allows the federal government to pay for these positions. Indian Health Service, I believe it was in 2019, testified to Congress that there was not a need. They shared information with Congress and said, there's not enough deaths to justify a medical examiner or a coroner's position. When that information was shared with me, I worked with our criminal investigators office to try to figure out, why would they say that? What we learned was that the Indian Health Services was reporting natural deaths that occur within the four walls of Indian Health Services. They were not including accidents, suicides, homicides, those cases that were unknown or undetermined, and then those cases that were pending determination. So in 2018, what we did is we looked at the data, because that would have been the year that IHS would have used to report to Congress in 2019. What we learned was that IHS reported there was roughly around 240 deaths, when in actuality, there were 487 deaths on the Navajo Nation. And that was when we learned that Indian Health Services was counting only those deaths that occurred, those natural deaths that occurred within the four walls of Indian Health Services. So even if there was a car accident on the road and that individual was brought into the hospital and they deceased in the hospital, that death would not be counted by Indian Health Services because it was not a natural death. Now, if a natural death occurred at home, those deaths are still not counted because it did not occur within the four walls of Indian Health Services. So these numbers have helped us not only to paint a picture of what is happening here on our nation, but they've been used to also correct some of the information that is being shared by our federal partners. And many of the information that is being shared is incorrect information. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak to all of you about what we are seeing here on the nation. I know that Delegate Crotty and Racita Billy, they have the data and the information when it comes to missing murdered. We call it missing murdered Diné relatives here on the Navajo Nation, but MMIP missing, I think everybody knows it as MMIP. Delegate Crotty and Racita Billy are the experts in that area, and using that information, I was able to include some of that into this booklet. So I appreciate that, Ms. Weddle, and that is, I always tell tribes, that's the power of numbers, because they're going to use numbers, and currently they are using numbers right now that are inaccurate, numbers that have been collected through different databases, because we went from using the UCR, which is what our law enforcement used to use when they were sending information to the Bureau of Indian Affairs Office of Justice Services, but that now changed to a different database, which is NIBRS. And it's very interesting that that Congress is asking us to collect this information, to collect this data, so that they can use, so they have an understanding of what is going on. And Delegate Crotty and I have gone back and forth about, the data, because I've collected the raw data, and Delegate Crotty and Ms. Billy now are collecting I'm not sure, I guess they're collecting their data when it comes to MMIP and working on a database that will help us to be able to correctly capture that data, so that we're sharing the right information with Congress. In addition to that, I will say that we caution, and in the booklet, I do caution to say that this is raw data, and all the information collected belongs to Navajo, and you cannot use that information without the permission of Navajo Nation Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Delegate. Really sobering statistics. We are getting the wrap it up sign in the room, but in terms of why voting matters, this is our state of affairs, where the Navajo Nation has over 250,000 calls for help, and just 21,000 arrests resulting from that, and most of those are for minor crimes, not the hard stuff. A few other statistics to leave you with that are very sobering.
It does include that's why I was talking about the federal, the declination of cases that are coming out from the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Yes. So I mentioned the U.S. attorneys are really the district attorneys for Indian country. They're doing the prosecutions. All the U.S. attorneys in the United States, violent crimes in Indian country are 25% of what they're doing. So the major cases, Indian reservations are not 25% of the United States, but yet we're 25% of the violent crimes caseload for the federal U.S. attorneys. We know that Native Americans suffer violent crime at least 2.5 times the national average. We know from the Department of Justice's own statistics that just 46% of violent crimes are even reported at all. So we know that these statistics are the real statistics are actually much higher. And we know that 1 out of 10 American Indians 12 and older become victims of violent crime each year. And that Native women suffer the rates of sexual violence 10 times the national average, and there's nothing we can do about it. According to the Justice Department's own data, we have half as many police officers as similarly situated rural communities. We have the BIA telling us we need 26,000 more officers just to get up to baseline. And then we have the stark reality that the entire BIA OJS is 450 employees nationwide. we're just orders of magnitude off where we need to be to actually make our people safe. And there can't be economic development, there can't be healing. Feeling safe in your own community is really the foundation for all the rest of it. And I really want to thank our council delegates and their staff for being here and all the incredible and inspiring work that they're doing and sharing. I know for all the tribal leaders in the room, you can get their contact information from me. I know they'd be happy to follow up with you and share more about all the great work that the Navajo Nation Council is doing. Thank you. OJ, we'll pivot back to you.
And, you know, I realize we go over time on laws, but I mean, everything that we're presenting here is so important to Indian country, and we want to make sure you get that information. You can always go to YouTube. The information is live streamed there, so if you're looking for something, you can go to the Coalition of Large Tribes. Just to let you know, Lucia, you're rounding everybody up, right? All right, cool. So just so you know, we're going to be putting a template letter on the tax consultation. And so you can go to the Coalition of Large Tribes, that'll be there. We'll also have the PowerPoint that they use so that you can include that with your template letter. But this is so important that we really need to ensure that we get a hold of our tribal leaders and that we make sure that each and every one of them is aware of the importance of this. And then the last one you heard, MMIW. I mean, it's almost it's a crisis. It's not almost a crisis, it is a crisis. And we really need to take and work on getting Congress to honor the treaties to get us that funding so that we can protect the missing and murdered Indigenous people, because it's men, it's women, it's children, and it's an epidemic that we need to try to get a handle on. The Coalition of Large Tribes put on a MMIW training. We brought in experts from all over the country. We did it in Montana. We had tribes from the Navajo Nation. We had the Rosebud Sioux tribe. We had tribes from Montana and South Dakota. And then we had border town police departments there. And we started a rapport between all of them so that they could work together on the MMIW deal and provide them the tools to solve cold cases and to work on MMIW. And Navajo was really a great part of that. So with that, we're ready to go, rock and roll. I didn't tell you what time it is because I lost my agenda. Washington, Chicago, Omaha, no good. Oh, I was one of the relocation children that they were talking about. We were actually relocated from South Dakota, my reservation, Rosebud. The first place they sent us was Chicago. When my mom and them snuck back, and then they found us, and then they shipped us off to Oakland. So I used to be an urban Indian. Ready? All right, let's bring them up. You get to have this place right here. Are you going to work down there? Okay. Oh, it's Dell? Hey, I already heard him. No.
Guess mic check.
Check. Yes, I think it's working.
Yes, it's working.
So we're going to do this panel a little bit differently. We're not going to have a moderator. We're going to just speak about certain experiences dealing with natural resources in Indian country. And the idea came out of a series of calls we had when the forum was coming together from all the people who've done the work in the background. And we thought that this was an area that we should highlight, especially for large land-based tribes, because there's so many different things happening around natural resources. And so each of us are going to talk a little bit about different subjects. And I'll let everyone introduce themselves and I spoke earlier on the tax issue, but from the Crow Nation and co-counsel for the Coalition of Large Tribes, and had a lot of different experiences around natural resources over a 25-year career and having grown up there as well.
Guatsi. Oh wait, yeah, it's on. Sorry. Guatsi Hopa. My name is Cassandra Pino. I'm originally from Albuquerque, New Mexico. My family's on my dad's side come from Acoma Pueblo and San Felipe Pueblo. And I'm currently the policy manager for the Native American Land Conservancy, which is a land conservancy based in Southern California. So we're a nonprofit that works a lot with tribes located in that region, but we've started to expand our work into Northern California and outside of the state, into Arizona and Nevada as well. And the purpose of our organization is to acquire, preserve, and protect Native American sacred lands, particularly lands that are off reservation. So many times, if there's an area of concern, particularly if it has a cultural site or spiritual values that are not protected, sometimes we are asked or requested by tribes to help them acquire it and hold it for the use and access of tribal people primarily. And we also use these areas for educational programming and sort of stewardship opportunities for Native people as well. We also do educational programming for non-Native people so that they can better learn how to interact with cultural landscapes and be better allies to tribal people all over the country. So my work in policy deals a lot with more of the higher level, assisting tribes on thinking of ideas of land protection on a large scale and preserving integrated cultural and natural resources in new ways with the opportunities that we see now, politically, financially, and on the grassroots level. So.
Hi, my name is Matone Brown. My father is from California, Northern California, Yalem Pomo tribe, and my mother is from St. Carlos, from the Apache tribe. And I started a podcast called The Fight for Us is a podcast to help my uncle Wensler and his family, the Apache Stronghold, with land acknowledgement and protecting sacred land and protecting water. And we started that, and I started to follow my uncle and to help with Oak Flat that's coming at Superior, that's being, Resident Copper has bought this area, and it's going to create a crater in this Oak Flat area in Superior. And right now, that land is very sacred to the Apaches, and there is no way we can stop this land acknowledgement unless we all come together and fight for what we believe in, and also for the Arizona State community, the water that everyone knows that the water is shortage here in Arizona. And this Resident Copper, that's not a company from United States, is going to tap into our groundwater, and it's going to take 250 billion gallons of water to get this mine going. And as everybody knows, our water in Arizona is already short. And today, October 1st, we're at 112 degrees. So it is something that we are fighting for, and all across the land, all sacred sites that are in danger with the government and how we get it, how it gets taken. Because I always tell everybody that the presidential voting is not all about that. It's about the Arizona. If you live in your state, it's all about who is running in your state. So for us, you got to look at the governor, and you got to look for congressmen, you got to look for the Senate. It's not just, I hear a lot of natives say they don't want to vote because they don't like either candidate of presidential debate or the presidential. But we also got to make sure that we vote here in Arizona, because as Oak Flat was taken, it was brought up by the late John McCain, Senator John McCain, and Jeff Flake. And so that's how Oak Flat got started. So that's what I'm here today, is just to talk about the voting for our state, and it happens in California too. Thank you.
Thank you. Chuck Hemphill, president of CKP Insurance. We work with Native American tribes to utilize their land base in a USDA program to help achieve funds to manage lack of precipitation and its impacts on both the economics of the tribe from their grazing operations, along with trying to strike the balance of keeping the land fertile by not overgrazing and utilizing those funds altogether in a overall approach that both is economically and sustainable for the land. And in talking about getting out the vote, I just want to make sure everybody knows that Ruben Gallego is going to be here tomorrow at 9 a.m. and, you know, the local, getting our state senators and that. I'm pretty sure he's going to be the next state senator. So everybody who can get here a little early at 9 a.m. He's coming, and I think we want to make sure that we got a good representation for him, because I think we're going to need to rely on him the next 6 years.
So based on the time, why don't we let everyone do 5 minutes, and then I'll just take whatever's left over, and I'm going to ask maybe if Jen could hook up to show a chart I have. I'm going to talk about water rights after they're done with their parts. So please go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess my little spiel will be, you know, about how, you know, voting representation and why voting matters in terms of preserving natural resources or cultural landscapes really stems from my experience working a lot in public lands and through federal land management policies. So I got involved in conservation when I was an intern for the Bears Ears Intertribal Coalition. And that was a coalition of 5 tribes who worked together to preserve the Bears Ears cultural landscape and designate it as a national monument. It was the first time tribes had ever proposed that to a president to be done. And it was a significant thing because it really opened the doors for tribes around the country to sort of reimagine how, you know, we think about public lands and how we think about federal co-management and co-stewardship of these lands. And I think that, you know, what we saw with Bears Ears was that it was established, and then with the next administration, it was illegally reduced, and then with the next administration, it was reinstated. And what we see with, you know, it's been mentioned many times today about this pendulum swinging back and forth, is that it is really important to remain vigilant when we think about voting and when we think about not just presidential administrations, but up and down the ballot. Because one thing I've noticed in all of my time working with tribes, working with Native organizations, and being in the room with federal agencies and state agencies, is that it really matters who's sitting on the other side of the table. And it sounds like a small little thing, but it matters when that federal or state agent is empathetic and listens to you and actually takes into consideration what you are telling them, because that's where change in policy comes from. That's where transformation in how tribes have been treated, how their lands have been treated, starts to take shape. Just this past summer, the U.S. finally recognized the damage and harm that dams in the Columbia River Basin have done to tribes since they were established in the 20th century. And that was just this past summer, something that tribes have been, you know, advocating against those dams for such a long time, and so many people who are not with us anymore, who had advocated against those dams, their words mattered and still reverberate today, because we're seeing that there are now policies being implemented to address those issues. We are seeing the Klamath dams come down, which is a long fought battle. We're seeing tribes, you know, be more involved in public land administration in terms of being empowered to actually, you know, get funding for co-stewardship. And what does a tribal ranger program look like in public lands? What does land back look like for different regions of the nation, where something that works for a Northwest tribe looks very different for someone in the Southwest? And what's really wonderful to see is that, you know, through these positive and proactive collaborations between tribal officials and state and federal officials that want to work with you and are actually excited to empower tribes, that sort of attitude makes a difference. And we've seen that with Secretary Holland being appointed to Secretary of the Interior. That in itself has had a cascading effect in how tribes are now leading a lot of these conversations and actually being provided these resources that will hopefully last a long time. So when we talk about voting, again, it's about more than just this one big presidential race. These local state races do matter because these representatives are making decisions that impact land policy, and that includes with renewable energy, with what we're seeing in the desert a lot, with renewable energy development. Sometimes is a complicated sort of conversation that needs to happen, and tribes are one of the most pivotal players in that conversation in terms of how to do renewable energy properly and in a way that doesn't completely eviscerate cultural landscapes in the desert. So we saw that a lot with, Vicuame in Nevada was established in a large part out of concern for how the solar industry has treated the desert in the past 2 decades. So we need to have these complex conversations when we're talking about climate change, protecting land, addressing the needs of tribal communities that are at the forefront of the climate crisis. And, it's just a matter of getting people in power who actually listen to you and will take your feedback and take seriously that tribes are sovereign nations with their own power and sovereignty to exert onto themselves and to their homelands. So that's why, voting is such an important aspect of preserving cultural landscapes.
My experience is very personal. As the speaker said before me, he's a product of relocation. I am also a product of relocation. My mother from St. Carlos was relocated to the Bay Area in Oakland, California, and my father is from that area, and that's how they met. So this fight has always been in my life as I grew up. My mother and my dad and my grandparents, they took Alcatraz in San Francisco. My uncle Wensler, he fought for Mount Graham. And so this is very personal to me. The mining and the water is very personal. I had a lot of family members pass away from cancer because of the mining. My grandfather, Paul Nosey Sr., passed away with leukemia at 39 because he worked in an asbestos mine. My grandfather, Jim Brown, had passed away with stomach cancer because he worked in a sulfur bank mine in California. So all these issues, all these things that we have is very personal to me. In California, we had a sulfur bank mine right next to our homeland, and they made a lot of tallings. If anybody know what tallings are, those are, when they dig for the mine, they got to put the tallings somewhere. And for us, they built houses out of tallings for us. And so the foundation that we were living on is polluted. It's hazardous, and we didn't know that at the time. And so as we go on with Oak Flat and my uncle and the Apache Stronghold, they talk about the culture and the religion, and they're very good at that to make people understand why Oak Flat is sacred to the Apaches and for everybody. But as for me personally, I always talk about the environmental of what mining does to our land, what mining does to our water. We've had a lot of deaths in our family. Back in the day, if you didn't need much education to have a mining job, so a lot of our ancestors worked in a mine. They worked. I've heard that in California they would put a bird in a cage and put it all the way down in a mine. And if they came up and the bird was dead, then nobody went down there. If the bird was alive, then they would send workers down there. So that's something that I have dealt with all my life culturally. We fought for our land. So Apache Stronghold, they're doing a great job. They appealed at the U.S. Supreme Court again to stop this Oak Flat mining. And I always tell everybody, it's not just for the Apaches, but it's also for everybody in the community. We're also trying to save lives for all people in Superior, in the valley, all over this area. We are trying to save Oak Flat. And for the water that gets done, I always tell everybody that everything's up. If we talk to EPA, and I always tell them, to me, EPA is just a cleanup crew, because in California, after the whole sulfur bank mine was shut down, we have EPA to come in to clean up, and it takes like 20 years for them to clean this area up where we live, and there's only a certain amount of time that you could be on this land. So on my reservation in California, there's a certain area you can only go over there between 3 and 7 o'clock, because other than that, it's hazardous. So there's just these things that we deal with in California that I know that they're going to deal here in Arizona. And I always tell everybody that it's not that far away. I mean, they say, well, it won't happen in 60 more years. Well, 60 years is not that far away. For us and Sulphur Bank Mine in California, it's not that far away. My grandfather had worked in there. And so it's just it's very personal to me, the land and the water that we're fighting for here. And like I had brought up earlier, that people always think that we're voting for presidential, but yes, but we're also voting for who's running for Senate, and who's running for congressman, who's running for governor, who's running for the mayor of your city. Because for us, the residents there, they're for the Oak Flat mining because they're going to get some money and they're going to get some land, but they also don't know that their water's going to get polluted. So it's just something that everyone needs to think of when we vote, that this is not just for the presidential debate. I keep telling everybody that it's also for us, for our sovereignty, for our federal land, because with federal land on all reservations, it's called federal land, which means that they can take whatever they want if they wanted to. If gold was found underneath this casino in Arizona here, they could come and take it because it's federal land. So that's why I'm always saying to be ready and always vote and look at the background, even the judges that you're voting for. If you don't know your judges, and Google the judges and find out who they are, because the judges are the ones that decide if it goes higher in the court. So, I mean, in the past, I never thought like, oh, the judges, I would just pick whoever I would, who I knew or who I recognized. I never took the chance to think of, oh, I better look at the judges because they're the ones that go through. As I follow Apache Stronghold and my uncle Wenzel Nosey, I realized about the judges there, and so that's very important to me. So again, I always like to, the most important thing for me is just voting and make sure you vote who you're voting in your state.
So I took a very different direction in getting here. I sell insurance, so I had no idea back in 2015 I was going to come out to Arizona and get the fortunate experience of meeting tribal communities. That was purely by accident and probably divine intervention. We were able to place the first USDA drought insurance, it's actually lack of precipitation insurance policy with the Navajo Nation, and then shortly after that we'd been working with Tohono O'odham and Hopi, and we were able to bring them on, and now we're up to 18 tribes. And water obviously is an extremely important element, not just here in the Four Corner states, but really across the entire country. It's an issue of water, and using the tribal land bases as an asset to be able to leverage that with government funds is something that really hadn't been able to be accomplished before. And with the money, I think we've got about 180 million since we've been placing policies since 2017 at this point. And most of the Department of Ag or Natural Resource Department of those tribes have that are participating have now increased by 10 to 15-fold their budget, which again, I think is a good thing, especially as we bring everybody together. In February every year we have a PRF Tribal Summit now where we have all of our customers and even some folks that are thinking about it, so we can get together as a group like Coalition of Large Tribes, so getting together groups to hear our voices heard and have conversations with each other about how we can improve natural resources and how we can integrate the protecting of the land, keeping it environmentally safe, but yet at the same time also farming and ranching, which is a cultural issue that we want to continue to protect as well, and striking those balances. So as we all come together and now we actually have funds to accomplish this, we can really move some things forward. So I think we've been able to come a long way since we started in 2017, but I think over the next 10 to 20 years as this progresses and more tribes join, I really think we'll see some great accomplishments as we go forward with managing those land bases and different initiatives that are going on. Lots of all these interesting things like the Intertribal Buffalo Council and trying to bring back the rangeland for buffalo. We're using the funds to help with that. So a unique thing where we're actually able to leverage our land bases to gain money to accomplish some of the goals. So that's something we look forward to continuing to work with the tribes on.
Thank you. Very efficient panel, I might add. Really good and on point, and I hope it leaves some time for a couple questions so we can have some Q&A with the audience. I'm going to transition and not talk about water rights, which would take up a lot of time because it's a very long, multi-decade, complicated process, and instead shift gears and talk about a project that Colt is directly involved in around bison restoration. And this connects to all of these things. You have to have available water, you have to have the rangeland, you can't be caught up in all the ag leases, so you have the space for the bison, and then you also need co-stewardship and co-management to increase the size of the area so that the herd can grow over time. And I think many of the people in the audience may or may not know, but it bears repeating. I was told by some elders at Crow, they said, as the bison go, so do we. And there were up to 75 million bison back in 1850, and it got down to 1,000 by 1895. I repeat, 75 million that were here, and slowly over time, some of it was intentional. There were people hired to decimate the buffalo, and they knew that if they did that, all the Plains Indians, the large land-based Indians, would start to starve and need to sell their land back to the U.S. in order to survive. The bison restoration effort has been a pretty long journey. We are set to partner up with the Intertribal Bison Council, and then through the Coalition of Large Tribes, find projects around the country. And this isn't about bison management. That's almost an oxymoron. The bison go where they're going to go, and they do what they do, and they're very powerful, special, spiritual relatives. And by having tribes in the driver's seat as the leading an indigenous-led effort, we want to see all the bison preserved. And we want all the Indians to have access to bison again. Everyone knows it's a healthy food and not the commodities that many of us grew up on. The bison provided for us. They are very intelligent, and they protect each other, and they're very loyal. And we have a lot of stories around all of that. And many of our, we used to roam and follow the bison wherever they were, and they led us to places. They would find safe passage. I mean, the bison are so intelligent that sometimes when a certain plant has died out in an area, they'll roll on its back and get the seeds, and then they'll go hundreds of miles, and they'll roll in that other location to replant the seeds. That, to me, is valuable indigenous knowledge, and that should be the centerpiece of any policy or agenda on how to restore the bison. There's a herd of 1,700 that originally came from the Cheyenne River, Lakota, and it's down at a ranch called Medno Zapata in southern Colorado. That area has the Great Sand Dunes National Park, and we have some nonprofit organization, World Wildlife Fund, the Nature Conservancy, who are partnering up with us because they believe that it should be indigenous-led. And we're getting resistance from some agency officials around what is the correct way to proceed. Is it that we have genetic purity with the bison for all sorts of their reasons and their science? And we say we don't slaughter the buffalo for irrelevant reasons, just because of management. We want to preserve all of them, partner with all of Indian country, and make sure everyone who wants bison back can have it for all the reasons. And let me just give you a quick example. When I was at Interior, there was some Yellowstone bison that were going to be provided to tribes in Montana. And actually Fort Peck was one of them, and Fort Belknap. They wanted bison back. The ranchers opposed. There was going to be litigation. I had a choice. Do I partner up with the Park Service and find the money so that these 50 herd can go and they can redevelop and re-accept bison? The emotion that came with that decision to support them when the bison finally came back after 100 years, there was not one dry eye when the bison were released back. They said, finally, our relatives are coming home. That all starts with indigenous-led, supporting indigenous knowledge, and listening to what the tribes have to say. So everything they said is absolutely right, and it's our values, our belief systems, that we protect the bison because they protected us, and we want them back, and we'll do whatever it takes to bring them home. That, to me, is indigenous-led, and it does matter who's across the table, if people care or not, or if they're open-minded and open-hearted enough to hear that, because all the Indians that we heard say they want it back. So we're going to follow the indigenous directives, and we're going to do what we can and help bring it back. And we're going to intercede in areas wherever we have to protect what is out there, and then expand and let the bison return to where they originally were, and have them show us the way. So that's something that I think is near and dear and important to all of us, and that's something that we want Colt and all the tribes that are connected to it. We ask for the support, and we ask for your partnership, and then we will do what is best for the entire communities. And so with that, I'll end with that note, and then just check in the audience for any questions, so that for any of the panelists here. Well, these efforts need to be funded. The federal government only has so much money, and even though there's a trust responsibility, she was asking, how do we partner on the bison-led effort? And I said funding, because this is the first time they've gotten funding from these recent bills, and it's very limited. And so we have to have third parties and our NGO partners involved, all of them who have an interest in this. And we need people to help fund those efforts so that we can create capacity in those communities and then save the opportunities that are out there, whether it's buying the land, setting aside, working out the legal documents on co-stewardship, co-management. We need all of those pieces, because it's like a puzzle that you have to put together, and there's a lot of people who can play a role in that, and I think it's very meaningful for all of those tribes we've heard from.
On a Section 17, like Coalition of Large Tribes and a lot of other tribal organizations, not only would that Section 17 be like tax exempt, but it's also considered a 501c3 in Indian country, where donations are tax deductible, correct?
Yes, that's my understanding. That's accurate, that would be a way as well, whatever the organizations are, the nonprofits and these specially chartered, federally chartered corporations like Colt and ITBC. They're both those types of organizations, and they can receive donations from other people.
You mentioned that government funding has always been an issue in terms of being able to, fund these types of efforts. And one thing that some of the tribal nations in the Great Plains have been considering having conversations about, and have had conversations with members of Congress about, is PILT, payment in lieu of taxes. Do you have anything you want to add in terms of how viable that option is to help to pay for some of these expenses that we're talking about here?
So the payment in lieu of taxes, what has happened when federal land is set aside, and then say they give an RFP for a lease for oil and gas or any other mineral extraction, and this is all connected, that when it's set aside, they put the payments that come from the producer in a fund called PILT, and then that is distributed to the local governments based on, say, it could be school needs, it could be any type of issue that the local government decides. There does need to be action to have a set aside specifically for tribes, because the same thing has happened. There's been all these oil and gas leases or other things, and then the money hasn't gone back to the tribal communities. So yes, I think that does need to be addressed, and there does need to be a set aside. And there are people in the administration working on that as an example. And then the Land Wildlife Conservation Fund, LWCF, which is some 900 million. I think tribes have received less than 1% of the LWCF fund over the years. These buckets of money from public lands should have a tribal set aside because they were originally tribal lands to begin with. All of them were. So there should be that piece that's connected. So however any of us could be supportive, in those efforts, would definitely welcome the opportunity. With no questions, any last just words that each of you want to say as we wrap up? Why don't we just go with each one?
Okay. I guess I'll just finish up by saying, there's no one tool that fixes all of the challenges that we're facing, and just in the context of trying to protect landscapes, trying to revitalize bison and salmon populations, trying to address climate issues that are coming up more and more with bigger storms and longer droughts. It requires a team of people to address those problems. And Indian country, I've been told this a lot by teachers and elders that we need help, and not in any way other than, we need allies to help us in our own endeavors and our own sort of paths towards self-determination in this, in this country that we now find ourselves in. And you cannot do that without allies in the government, just kind of plain and simple. It's really hard to get things done in a positive way for your people that leaves long-lasting legacies for environmental protection and proper environmental regulation when you're completely on the defensive all the time, like combating, in litigation, not getting along with your representatives, not feeling empowered to really employ your sort of sovereignty on that national level. And so I'll just finish off with saying that voting is super important to addressing these environmental, cultural, spiritual, intertwined issues, because the people that you have to work with are in government, and you want to elect people that will surround themselves with good people. You want to elect folks with integrity and folks that you have faith that they will live up to what you expect of them, because they are your representatives, they work for you, and you have every right the next election cycle to go up to them and say, you did not fulfill these promises, and not only will I not vote for you next time, I will organize people to vote against you. You have every power to do that every election cycle. And I think that for Native people, more and more we're realizing our collective power in the voting booth, and being, citizens helps with that in the past 100 years. So I just hope that with more and more of our voices in those voting booths, we can elect representatives that listen to us, that are empathetic to our needs, and that surround themselves with good people who help empower Indian country.
I just want to finish off by saying that, for everybody here in Arizona to please make sure you pay attention to the Oak Flat fight that's going on right now. My uncle and his family, the Apache Stronghold, they're the ones that are fighting this mining company. If anybody wants to get more information about it, you can go to their website, and you'll catch up on all the updates that's going on right now. But again, like we were talking about earlier, mining's a big thing here in Arizona, also in California, and it's something that we are against with the mining. Oak Flat is not on the reservation, so that's where a lot of people were a lot of non-natives were telling us, why were you fighting for land like this when it's not on our reservation? Well, they should know that all of this area was our land, so all the way from Superior all the way down to Mexico, all the way to New Mexico and up north. So we had all this area. When it comes to environmental protection laws, those get bypassed when there's a lot of money involved. So Rio Tinto, Resolution Copper is like $16 billion worth. So they're just gonna, look past all those laws of for environment. So please make sure you pay attention to what goes on in your state and also your water. And the only thing I want to say is that, if anybody wants to know more about Oak Flat, please go to the Google. You could look at Apache Stronghold, and or they're all also on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you.
Just repeating that your vote is important, and again, I'm just going to push about Ruben Gallego to being here tomorrow and showing strong support so that he knows that the Native American vote is behind him. So when we need him to be supporting the next 6 years, that we have that relationship going. So make sure we come out and support him tomorrow.
Just would like to thank my fellow panelists here, if you can give them a round of applause.
All right. Thank you so much for hanging in there with us today. We have had an incredibly robust group of panels with experts from all across Indian country, from across cultural and other types of communities. And we have just a few more folks left, so we appreciate everybody hanging in there with us. Again, I'm Lisa Ortega. I am the Vice President of Thunderbird Strategic. And you all have seen me too much probably throughout this whole process. I get pulled into a lot of things, but I'm very grateful and humbled to hold this work and walk alongside everybody here. And with that being said, I'm incredibly humbled to introduce this next speaker. This woman is a former Miss Indian World. She was the only person to hold this title for consecutive years in a row because COVID hit. But she held her title in grace, and she was a huge advocate and partner in getting out the Native vote in the youth space. She has served in a communications lead capacity at the Center for Native American Youth, and now, because of all of the work that she's done across Indian country, she's able to do this in her own capacity. So if you all will help me welcome to the stage Miss Cheyenne Kippenberger.
Thank you, sister. Hi, everybody. First of all, thank you for staying. Hey, it's been a long day, but I appreciate everybody that's still in the room. I'm going to introduce myself in my language, of course, just proper due diligence. So, Chehentamo, Chahochivke, Cheyenne Kippenberger Kotum, Yaketeshet Chahochivke Ethotum, and Yatasre Kuathotum, Seminole Katomlet, Chilean Katomlet. My English name is Cheyenne Kippenberger, but my given traditional name is Ethet, and that means fire in English. It was given to me by my paternal grandmother. I am a proud citizen of the Seminole Tribe of Florida. I traveled here from my home on the Hollywood Reservation in South Florida, but I am also Chilean American, and so I got a little spice to it. But it's exciting to be here. I appreciate the invitation. I want to thank Four Directions. I want to thank Phoenix Indian Center and the partners for bringing us together today. These gatherings are extremely important to keeping that spark alive, you know, through this long election year. So I'm here because I love my people. I love my homelands, and I love what that has made me and who I am today. And I can sit here and definitely say that everybody in this room is also here because they love their people and they love their lands. And it's important to us to protect those things and do everything in our power to protect those things. And it's before I served as the lead of communications for the Center for Native American Youth at the Aspen Institute. I was actually a youth ambassador with them. And one of our main pillars at CNAY is civic engagement. And so what does it look like to involve young people in civic engagement, give them the tools, the resources, the funding to be able to take everything that we're able to teach them, but then go back to their communities and empower their people through their different initiatives. And the conversation around civic engagement was always really interesting to me because when I was a fresh 18-year-old, I was definitely one of those young people that thought that voting was useless. I didn't think that my vote had any power. I didn't believe that something as simple as registering myself and going and participating in that would make a change. And it's really special actually to be here with some of the people that are here today, philanthropically speaking, because getting myself out of that mentality was because of education. It was because of trainings and awareness that was made available to me. And those trainings and those resources were made available to me because of funding that came from foundations like Coulter. And so Licia mentioned that I was involved with the Get the Native Vote Out as a youth, but I was also heavily involved with the census in 2020. And, you know, being a little bit of a radical, definitely stubborn as well. Again, you know, I didn't think that there was power in those things. I was invited to go to Washington, D.C. for the first time when I was about 22 years old. And I sat in on a training about civic engagement. I learned about the census, why it was important to our people. And I received micro-grant funding. And I went home and I decided to create an action project. And I wanted to utilize my platform as Miss Indian World. And so what I decided to do in the midst of COVID nonetheless, I thought, what can I do? I was like, I have the internet, I have this awesome platform, I have a really nice crown and sash. What can I do with this? And what I did was I created a project where I invited royalties from across Indian country to create signs that encourage their communities to complete the census and to post it online and have people register. And I also encouraged town halls to be hosted by our royalties. And if I can remember my stats correctly, I had about 80 different royalties and ambassadors representing their respective tribes, anything from powwows to MC clubs, and we reached 16 states. And we were able to get people from our communities to participate in the census. And so because of funding like folks at Coulter, I was a young person that was empowered to go home and help my people become civically engaged. And it's kind of a full circle moment to be here today, because if it wasn't for that training when I was about 22 years old and I was exposed to DC for the first time, I went to the Hill and I learned all those processes, I don't know if I would be up here on this stage speaking in front of all of you. And so I want to express my gratitude for the people that have invested into Indian country, because that micro grant launched me into the work that I believe in today. And so Shanabashat for that. It was only a micro grant. I think I only needed like $500, guys. It wasn't anything that significant, but through that, I realized that my vote was important, that the census was important, that getting our community educated was important. I come from a community where I'm sure as much of as the same as your communities, we're super involved in our tribal elections, but we're not very involved in our local state elections. And that's something that we're trying to work on back home right now. But it is helping people to see that we are very, very powerful. And, you know, throughout the last 2 days that I've been here, I keep hearing the word collective. And that is something that we can't stray away from, because there is a lot of power in coming together as people, not just in Indian country, but across all of the minority groups in the United States. I'm Chilean American. I'm technically first generation American because of my mother. And so what is that? You know, to be a Miss Indian World whose mother traveled here at 16, learned English, and accomplished everything that she's accomplished, but then also be a people descended from a people that have been here for thousands and thousands of years. And so I feel in myself that own collective, the collective of knowledge, the collective of experiences, the collective of initiatives that we can see be successful across all of our people. And so, you know, looking back, I was something as simple as like a youth that didn't believe in that, and now I'm advocating for that. And so this collective that we keep talking about, the collective that we've been preached to about these past 2 days, what is that collective power? What can it do? And I'm here to say that philanthropy and bringing us together and exchanging, it works. Action planning together works. We saw it happen at Standing Rock. We saw it happen with the Black Lives Matter movement. And it's continuing to happen, not just here in the United States, but across the world. People are coming together because there is a vision that all of us believe in. It is a vision of equity. It's a vision of acceptance. It's a vision where we're not having to fight for our health, for our bodies, for our lands. And we know these things as indigenous people because our knowledge systems outdate their country. We've been stewards of the land since time immemorial. We know what it is to have a harmonious mutualism with the planet. We know what it is to have exchange amongst one another and whatnot. And so I encourage you guys to think about what is civic engagement. You know, it's understanding and educating our people and our communities on the structures of our local government. What's happening in our local elections? It is giving space and centering youth perspectives and voices in issues that affect us and policies that affect us. Civic engagement is thinking of future generations. It is thinking of our commitment and responsibility to those future generations. And what are we doing to empower them, to uplift them, and to honor them? Civic engagement is running for office at the local level, at the state level. It's fundraising. It's helping to back campaigns of people that we know are going to honor their promises to us when they're campaigning. It's creating voter guides. It's holding forums such as this one. We are already civically engaged, but how do we get the people that aren't here to do that? It's reminding them of their responsibility to our communities. We are a people that has endured so much to be here. And I think at any opportunity that I'm given, I'm constantly reminding myself, as well as other people that I get to speak in front of, that if there's one responsibility that we should constantly be remembering, but also honor, it is that to our ancestors. I refuse to believe that our ancestors did the things that they did for us to be here today, suffering, fighting for our bodies, fighting for our mental health in our communities, fighting for our lands. I believe that they wanted us to have prosperous lives, healthy lives, happy lives. And this is one tool in our entire toolbox to achieve that for our people. And so what is our power? What does that power mean to us? What matters to us? Our lands, our rights, our women's bodies, housing, education, equity, representation. These are the things that we need to look out for when these candidates are coming into our communities and trying to get our votes from our people. Grill them the same way that we grill each other. We don't think twice when people come into our community and we're like, who's your dad? Who's your grandma? Do the same thing to those people. Ask them what their intentions are. Have they been coming around trying to create meaningful, impactful relationships with our communities? And I also want to encourage people to run for office, but understand that these local positions are just as important as the federal positions. Who is running for your county commission? Who's running for mayor? Who's running for your school board? Who's running for state house, for governor, for senator? All of these positions affect our daily lives much more than the presidential election does. So we vote these local officials in. And once they're in there, we show up. We show up to their town halls. We show up to the county meetings, the budget meetings, their forums. And we show them that we are about not just our votes, but what's behind our votes. We let them know that we are going to hold them accountable. Are they thinking about our future generations? Are they thinking about their future generations? Because we are not only strong in culture or in medicine, but we're strong in numbers. We are strong together. And they can't stand that we're active, that we're showing up, that we're making noise, that we're asking questions, that we're demanding answers. They can't stand that. Our unity terrifies them. And so I ask you to keep this momentum alive and to use it. Use it to propel us forward. Use it as the wind behind our backs, as our motivation through this election season, because the Native vote matters. We matter. Our issues matter. We are embedded into the very fabric that has created this country and made it what it is today. And we must never let them forget that we are here and that our numbers matter. And so show up, show out, vote, drive your aunties and your grandmas to the polls, run for office, show them what our vote means and the value that it holds. Because together we can accomplish equity, we can accomplish positive, proper representation, politically speaking, and demand that our rights as dual citizens in this country are upheld. And so let us all do everything in our own individual power, as well as in our collective power, to make sure that we are securing a beautiful future for our future generations. Let our love for our communities, for our land, for our cultures, for our identities, keep us motivated through this election season. Shanabashat Mado, and thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Chris Sharp. I'm from the Colorado River Indian tribes. My tribe is Mojave. And I work for the School of Social Work at ASU, Arizona State University. Thank you for joining this conversation. We originally had a panel, but one of our panelists couldn't make it. So I have the pleasure of talking with somebody who I work with on a day-to-day basis. Like I said, my title is Clinical Assistant Professor at the School of Social Work, and I direct the Office of American Indian Projects. But I also am the board chair for Native American Connections, and so I have the pleasure of introducing our Chief Executive Officer, Trula Bruninger, and I'll let her introduce herself and turn it over to you.
Good afternoon. I'm Trula. I'm Dana. Grew up in northern Arizona. Turiji Nishle, Bitterwater clan. Hanalani, my paternal clan. And I am Navajo. Grew up on and off the reservation. And I am the president and CEO of Native American Connections, the first Native person that held that position with the organization, and very excited about the work that we do. Do you want me to share what we do later or now?
Well, first off, I just want to just let everybody know this panel or this conversation is going to be about health and mental health and behavioral health. And so Native American Connections is a leader in our community. We're specifically in the Phoenix metro area. So I want to just ask you, Trula, what are some of those services that your organization provides to the community?
Okay, thank you, Chris. We've, this is like a talk show. We're a nonprofit. We've been in the Phoenix metro area since 1972, 50 years in existence. And the program began very small, and they'd only had one director ever since its when it started. And now I'm the second CEO for the organization. And it's grown a lot, and the original mission was to provide treatment to Native men who were were urban Indians. And so the service began, it was named Indian Rehab. And as it grew over the years, it addressed, and it grew to providing more services, addressing substance use, building residential centers for men. We have 2 residential centers. One is a family residential center, and the other one is a men's residential center. And we have outpatient, intensive outpatient services. And over the years, as you know, there are issues that natives or just the regular citizens in the U.S. face where housing is an issue. And we also call them, the issues in the community, we call them social determinants of health. And that's the approach that we use at NAC, Native American Connections, that we try to address those areas that impact people's lives. So if you have a health condition and you need to get care to address that health condition, are you going to address that health condition when you have many other issues that you're facing and have to deal with? Food insecurity, maybe you become homeless and you can't pay your rent. So there's so many issues and factors that people struggle with, and so when you're faced with that, you're generally not going to focus on your health. So we try to address all those social determinants of health to be able to experience better outcomes for natives as they seek care and live a quality life. So our organization does that through our integrated health program, which encompasses medical care. We just added a new mobile service to our services that go out to all of our 22 properties in Metro Phoenix. We have affordable housing, we have shelters for youth, shelter for adult, and we also have what we call permanent supportive housing, which is a housing program that also provides case management services so we can assist the residents to making better decisions so they can stay housed. We also have 2 other properties in development. One is family transitional housing, and that will probably break ground in the new year. And we also have another property that's in construction for seniors shelters and affordable housing units in Central Phoenix. So that's the work that we do on a daily basis, and we're a recognized and well-respected organization regionally and nationally. We have get a lot of interest in people coming to visit us because they want to know how we do it, how we provide services, and how we've been successful. And one of our key, the key interest that people want to come is we integrate our treatment services with native healing practices, and that's worked out really well, and the outcome's been really good. So, and then also the integration of the healthcare, behavioral health with housing, and so individuals from all over the country come and visit and want to be able to replicate what we do in their communities. So my job is basically to run that with a wonderful senior leadership team, and we work closely with tribes. We have networks and community engagement discussions with people who support us in the city, the state. We get a lot of HUD funding. Of course, we get Indian Health Service funding also, and we also seek foundation funding.
And I'll just add to that, Trula, as a board member, when we hear about the amazing work that NAC has been doing around housing, one of the questions I always ask is, how many of our residents are tribal or American Indian Alaska Native citizens of their tribes? And I'm very proud to say that we're around 50%, right? Even though we're around maybe 5-6% of the overall population, we are a place for our tribal members to go get affordable housing. And sometimes some of our successful clients that are successful in our substance use programs, there's not a lot of transitional type housing back on the reservation. And so it's a place for someone when they're just getting out of treatment and they need affordable housing or that transitional place where they can kind of build themselves up, right, and get a job and live that healthy lifestyle. That NAC still serves those people through our housing projects. And obviously housing is a real big issue here in the Phoenix metro area, as well as other places. And obviously on the reservation, the wait lists are very long. And so to say that we have 50%, hover around that, I think is something that I'm very proud of as a board member. So Trula, I'm curious, what opportunities do you think that there are in the near future, in terms of urban Indian health organizations?
We're with Indian Health Service funding through that mechanism under they call it Title V, through the line items that part of the Indian Health Service budget. And we're in the period where we have opportunities to respond to the initial budget that comes out. They call it budget formulation, the tribal consultation process. So they provide that opportunity to tribes and also to urban providers such as us. And so we have an opportunity to always fight for additional funding. Right now, our funding base is substance abuse, medical care, and also diabetes, the special diabetes funding that all natives get, either through direct service lines or through 638 or through urban Title V projects. So the opportunity that allows us is always to advocate for that additional funding. And I think historically, I'd say probably more than 10 years. I've been in this business for 30 years and have a strong healthcare background. In 10 years ago, urban Indians didn't have a strong voice. And I think as we fought over the years, now they call the system of UTI, Urban Tribal and IHS, direct services IHS. IHS, tribes, and urbans. I forget the acronym, sorry. So now that we have, they always refer to that acronym, and one of those acronyms is Urban Indians. So and we all know that a lot of our natives that leave the reservation, they come seek work or education in urban centers. So they're faced with not having the access to care. Luckily in Phoenix here, we have the Phoenix Indian Medical Center, and there's other tribal 638 programs also in the community. So we have that opportunity to partner with them as an organization. We have a contract with an Alaskan organization. They send their members here for treatment. So there's always those type of opportunities that we have with tribes. And as the system of care for Indian health for all Indian country, I think we advocate together. We attend a lot of the tribal consultation meetings. We support tribes in their quests in advocating for themselves, because all of our users within our system are tribal members from all over the country. So the opportunity there is just take advantage of advocating for the organization and the community and Indian country, and also taking advantage and making sure that we uphold, exercise our right to vote. And I think that's highly, very important for all of us to be able to have an impact in our communities.
Thank you, Trula. And what you had mentioned too is, through IHS, and I'm sure a lot of you already know that Congress really funds IHS on a year-to-year basis, and so having that voice and being able to advocate and also voting, right? Voting for your congressional representatives is very important. But I also want to acknowledge that we've had some challenges, and that's to say the least here in Arizona, with some illegitimate providers that have really impacted our services. And I got family members that have been impacted, and some aren't with us anymore, and it's sad to see. And really, the way what I look at that, it's kind of like a perfect storm, because some people found out that the state wasn't monitoring the access, the Medicaid program, the American Indian Health Plan, and so it just blew up, and it's actually the biggest fraud case here in the state of Arizona. And so we really need our state politicians here in the state of Arizona to really do something about this. It feels like, things aren't really being done. It's dragging their feet. And, the response from Access, in my opinion, this is my opinion, not as a faculty member of Arizona State, really, shutting down those houses right before the summertime was really inhumane thing to do, because there's people that, were kicked out on the streets. And last summer was very, very hot, almost like it is today. So we have to even look at our state elected leaders and make sure that they know, hey, this can't happen. We have to do better for our people. And it has impacted our legitimate providers. So, I'll just kind of say that, that, both state elections and federal elections are very important, especially from us coming from that healthcare perspective. And Trula, I don't know if you have anything to add.
When that crisis was occurring, we were involved in terms of helping address those people who became homeless. And we had an entity called the Lodge. We contracted with the Maricopa County, where we housed individuals. And it was a very, very sad situation. And we've been involved in the quarterly tribal consultation discussions with Access that they've been holding quarterly in various locations. And we've hosted a couple of them at our location. They also went up to the reservation at Twin Rocks or Twin Arrows. They held a tribal consultation there to get the input from tribes and urbans and just regular native tribal members. So they're slowly trying to make change, and we all understand the bureaucracies within state and federal systems, that change doesn't always happen quickly. They're changing policy, they've changed management. Unfortunately, some of the policies may slow things down in terms of reimbursement, but they're addressing it. And I think we have to keep pushing. We have to keep being involved and speak our minds, and making sure that we protect our rights and protect our tribal members. Make sure that they have access to quality care, safe care.
Thank you, Trula. And just last thing, the last presidential election, the margin was 10,500 votes. That's 0.3%. that's very, very slim margin, right? And the Native vote is 5%. So the more the Native population gets out there and votes, the more impact. We do have a strong voice and a determining factor here. And so, you know, tell your relatives, tell your, you know, the young ones especially, sometimes they just might not know how or might feel apathetic. It's really important. And so just want to thank you all for inviting us, and I hope the rest of the forum goes well. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to sing like this.
She's singing Ink Pata. No. Just go sing. While we're waiting. It's raining. You hear the rain?
Huh?
You hear the rain?
Yeah. Okay, we're almost done here. You know, just so you know, over the course of today, yesterday, today we have right now 200 viewers on live stream. So I mean, you may not be able to see them here, but they're out there. Yesterday we had over 300. We're, you know, in with the people that have come and gone these past 2 days. You know, we're hitting about 800 people. So, I mean, the messaging here is really strong. And I think we're getting the word out to Indian country throughout the United States about how important this is. And then just to follow up on what some of the speakers have said today is we need our people to vote. We need our people to run for office. And I guess the thing that I want to ask is, in Indian country, who's going to be our Stacey Abrams? Who is going to be the one that is going to run for governor? We know Peggy Flanagan has. I actually worked with Peggy when we were both within the Paul Wellstone. And so we have one, but we need more than one. We need to make sure that we have our young people looking at it. We need them on our school boards, our county commissioners, our water commissions, every local thing. And I always said that, you know, voter suppression, they think it's to go for the president and stop us from electing a senator. Voter suppression is to stop you from getting on the school board. It's to stop you from getting on the county commissioners. I always call the counties the first line of defense for Indian country. What they do is ensure that we have a problem anytime we try to vote. We have shown, Four Directions has shown over and over, you give natives equal access to the ballot box, we'll show up. And they know that, and that's why we have these barriers. So with that, we want to close this out in a good way. And we would, hold on. She's telling me what to do again. I never know if she's going like this or going like this. And then she whispers 50 feet away, and I understand her. Okay, what we'd like to do, if we could play a real short video before we get started, and then I want to bring us into the closing of a good way of today. Be good if we could have sound.
Please.
I know it's doing that because we're going to try to honor a white guy.
Of little. Water is life. This is something we have always believed in. Water brings life to our crops, our medicine, and ourselves. It is sacred to us. Without it, we could not replenish our bodies. Our crops would not grow, and our livestock would not survive. Yet, our resilience has brought us through many tough times. In seasons of little rainfall, it is comforting to know that our farms, our ranches, and our livelihoods are protected by CKP Insurance. They understand that water is vital to all of us, to our way of life. CKP Insurance is proud to insure 12 indigenous tribes of North America. CKP specializes in pasture, rangeland, and forage insurance, ensuring that you don't have to worry about your livelihood. To CKP Insurance, thank you.
Chuck, you want to come on up here? And, you know, we've always had a positive relationship with Chuck. Coalition of Large Tribes, at one time we found ourselves really struggling. And the board went and said, I know we're struggling, but we're not going to take and have tribes pay dues during the pandemic. And me being the executive director going, okay, but where do I get it? And Chuck came in, and he started funding the Coalition of Large Tribes so that we could continue to do our good work, and we didn't have to charge the tribes during a pandemic a yearly due. And that actually helped save us, in which we're able to be here today. And as a matter of fact, we're here today because of Chuck. The sound, even though they messed it up on the guy that's paying them, is provided by him. The internet, the banquet room. He made this happen for Indian country. So because of that, we want to honor you, Chuck. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our spiritual leader here. Just let you know, I wanted to give him an Indian name, and it was Tipi Hokshila, homeboy. But my wife said no. So.
Oya, midaki api, ambete washte lilo wopila chichapulo. Midaki api ne wichasha washte ne chia kapo na ushilape ne chia. Na wacheki na eke na wachozani na woke ne ichi wichasha washtela. What I said is, in my language, my Lakota language, that I honor this man, my family honors this man, and all of you honor this man for what he does. So there's a history behind our honoring. When we wrap a blanket around somebody, we're wrapping Mother Earth around them. A long time ago, we used buffalo ropes, and maybe someday with Dell's help and my sister Jennifer's help and the coalition, we can start using buffalo ropes again down the road. So I'd like you to come up here, my friend. We're going to scalp you first, and when you walk off this stage, you're just going to have a breechcloth on. You're in trouble. And the beard's got to go. You know, when we honor a relative like this, I always ask him, what society you come from? And if he would have said an elk dreamer, I would have kicked him off the stage. Because you know why? He would have been wrapping this blanket around a whole bunch of ladies and he would have got in trouble. So I think we'll keep him in the Buffalo Nation. That way he'll be okay. So my friend, today you join our family and you probably joined it a long time ago. And we thank you for everything that you do for us. Help us to be able to do this so that we can push ahead with our sovereignty and you'll be right beside us. And the only thing is that when you go to Mother Earth, we have to come get that blanket in you because your family's out of it. You got to come to Lakota country and be in our cemetery. Ho, Madakiasi. And I'd like you all to line up and shake this man's hand. That's one of our big traditions to thank him for what he's done. So, brother, come down there. Just don't let my first wife shake your hand because she'll pinch you on the butt. Right, Barb?
Well, you ain't gonna believe this, but according to the agenda, it's 5 o'clock. Tomorrow we have one more day. It's gonna be an easy day, but again, I really wanna thank each and every one of you, not only here, but those people that are online, for coming here, for listening. You know, there's a young lady walking out there. Her name's Janine Abrams, and she's with Fair Count. We were talking about relationship with organizations. She flew here from Georgia to spend 15 minutes on a panel. Thank you. Yes, and then just so you know, Gallegos will be here tomorrow. He's running for the U.S. Senate. He'll be here, what time? 9? He'll be here at 9 o'clock. What time we have breakfast? 8 to 9. So if you get here and eat at 8:55, you're going to miss him. But then again, with his last name, he's probably like us. He'll be late, so you'll still make it. All right, washte. Have a good evening, and we'll see you tomorrow.